Chapter 1032. However, he was in a foreign land and couldn't send a message to the sect master. Fortunately, as long as he didn't die, the battlefield mark wouldn't disappear. The sect master and the others could use this method to determine his safety. "What's up with that Dao soldier?" Feng Wujiang asked. Jianghu and the others had seen Dao Shirshan before, so they had some guesses about Lu Ye's background. Similarly, Feng Wujiang also saw the Dao soldier and confirmed that Lu Yi was a cultivator from the 9 states. "It's a complicated story." Lu Yi explained in detail how he was captured by Yu Daiwei and taken to a small secluded mystic realm. Feng Wujiang raised an eyebrow. "What does that supremacy look like?" "His appearance is very ordinary. There's nothing special about him, but his cultivation level should be very high. As for his height, he's about this tall." Lu Yi described briefly. Taishan. Feng Wujiang immediately understood and saw through the supremacy's identity. "Eldest senior brother, you know him?" Lu Yi couldn't help but recall that the first thing eldest senior brother asked when he saw him was, "How's Taishan?" Now it seemed that eldest senior brother probably thought he was from Taishan. Otherwise, why would he have a Dao soldier with him? More than that. Feng Wujiang looked like he was reminiscing. "Taishan and I have known each other for a long time. He was my most capable subordinate back then. He also comprehended the refining method of Dao soldiers, so he naturally knows how to refine one." "You said that he had something like a disc in his hand?" "Yes, when he showed it to me it seemed like he wanted me to do something with the disc, but no matter how I looked at it, I couldn't find anything special about it." Feng Wujiang's expression was slightly grave. Lu Yi didn't know what the disc was, but he knew. After all, he was the one who found it back then. However, even if he used it at that time, he couldn't win over the world, so he hid it with Qiumin. He didn't expect that it would fall into Taishan's hands now. It seemed that Taishan hadn't been quiet in the past few decades when he wasn't in the 9 states. Feng Wujiang didn't know how it ended up in Taishan's hands. The only thing he was sure of was that it must have come from Qiumin based on his understanding of Taishan. There was probably some coercion involved. While he was deep in thought, Lu Yi asked, "Eldest senior brother, what exactly is a Dao armament?" Dao 13 had said that he was a Dao soldier, but Lu Yi had never figured out what a Dao soldier was. However, since eldest senior brother could recognize that Dao 13 was a Dao soldier, he should know something about it. "It's a humanoid artifact refined using a secret technique. Under this secret technique, a Dao soldier can grow at an incredible speed, but the price is that their potential is squeezed out. Therefore, a Dao soldier will have a good cultivation, but there will be no room for improvement. Moreover, this secret technique will cause great damage to the Dao soldier's sentience. Take the one following you for example. He has a 5th order divine sea realm cultivation, but he won't be able to advance any further in his life. You should be able to tell that his sentience isn't high." Lu Yi nodded slightly. Only now did he understand what a Dao soldier was. Just as eldest senior brother had said, Dao 13's intelligence was not high. At best, he was only slightly better than a real fool. He was slightly frightened. From the looks of it, Dao 13 was not the only Dao soldier under Taishan's command. 13's rank explained many things. "That Dao soldier was refined by Taishan. How did you make him obey your orders?" "Junior brother, I used a little trick to control his mind." Feng Wujiang's expression brightened. "Control his mind? Like the blood race's blood seal?" Lu Yi said, "I've never seen the blood seal before and I don't know what it does, but my method is probably stronger than the blood seal. My control over Dao 13 is absolute. He won't disobey my orders." "Is there a limit?" Feng Wujiang asked again. "What do you mean? Is there a limit to the number of people you can control?" "There shouldn't be." Lu Yi thought about it. He had enslaved a lot of blood race people along the way and so far he hadn't felt anything wrong with it. After all, the soul control divine rune was planted in the soul slave spirit sea. Under normal circumstances, as long as Lu Yi could break through the soul defense of others, he could plant the soul control divine rune. Of course, if the soul was too strong, it would be difficult to plant the soul control divine rune. To provide you with the latest update of Great God Momo's Human Race Great Sage. Chapter 1032, Soul Control: The Wonderful Uses of the Formation Board. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation: When the rune was planted, the target would resist. Take Jianghu and the others for example. Lu Yi estimated that even if they opened up their soul defense, he wouldn't be able to plant the soul control divine rune on them. The difference in soul power was too great. An expert like Jianghu would only need to struggle a little to prevent his rune from forming. Good. Feng Wujiang's expression was excited. He patted Lu Ye's shoulder and said, Junior Marshal Brother, it's great that you're here. Lu Yi looked at him in confusion. Feng Wujiang smiled and said, You're new here, so rest for now. I'll tell you later. Junior Marshal Brother, you said you have a lot of questions. You can ask them now. Lu Yi did have a lot of questions, but he didn't know where to start. After a moment of silence, he asked, Senior Marshal Brother, were you sent here after the final battle? Yes, it's been almost 40 years. What about Senior Jianghu and the others? They came even earlier, Feng Wujiang smiled. Feng Wujiang chuckled. Furthermore, they weren't sent here in batches. They were all sent here one by one. The span of time was very long, several hundred years. Junior brother, you were also sent here by heaven's will. You should have experienced your cultivation being sealed before, right? Lu Yi nodded. Yes. Now it seemed that all the human cultivators sent to the blood refining realm by Tianji had their cultivation sealed and had to slowly recover. He wasn't the only one. Junior Marshal Brother, have you thought about why Tianji sent us here but sealed our cultivation? Heaven and earth have their own will. Tianji is the will of the 9 provinces. This realm should also have its own will, but it's not as strong as Tianji's. We were sent here from the 9 provinces, which is tantamount to invading this realm. If we don't conceal ourselves, the will of heaven and earth in this realm will react and we'll be in a disadvantageous situation. Feng Wujiang looked at Lu Yi in surprise. Junior Marshal Brother, you're indeed quick-witted to be able to think of this. We also had our own speculations as to why Tianji wanted to seal our cultivation, and our thoughts are similar to yours. He sighed. But because of this, many seniors were put in a disadvantageous situation as soon as they appeared. They lost a lot of people. Even if Jianghu and the others had a strong foundation, their strength was limited after their cultivation was sealed. If they were unlucky, they would be discovered by the blood race experts. Naturally, it boded ill rather than well. Why did Zhou Qianji send so many top experts here? To save the human race of this realm? Lu Yi asked. Probably. We've been painstakingly searching all these years, but we haven't been able to find an accurate answer. Almost everyone was sent here without knowing anything. Back then, when I came here, the Jade Blood Sacred Land didn't exist, and those seniors didn't have much contact with each other. They were all experts who could suppress an era. Junior Marshal Brother, you also understand that no one is willing to submit to another. Moreover, there are people from both sides, so it's naturally difficult to unify. After that, I spent about 10 years contacting many seniors and established the Jade Blood Sacred Land in the Shenkai Sea with them. Then, I moved a large number of humans from the surrounding 50,000 kilometers of the Shenkai Sea to this place. That's how the Jade Blood Sacred Land came to this place. But because of this, we've been completely targeted by the blood race. Over the past few decades, the blood race has come to encircle us once every few years. Many seniors have died in battle, and the defenses of the Jade Blood Sacred Land have been weakened layer by layer. This time, the blood race has mobilized far more troops than before. Moreover, according to the information gathered by those seniors, the blood race has also mobilized a large number of experts this time. It's very likely that a large number of holy seeds are hidden among them. Senior Marshal Brother, what do you want me to do? Lu Yi asked. There's indeed something I need you to do, but there's no rush. The blood race is still gathering their forces. Moreover, it won't be easy for such a large force to cross the Shenkai Sea. We still have at least 2 months to prepare. However, the fact that Zhou Qianji chose to send you here at this time means that you have the ability to help the Jade Blood Sacred Land increase its strength. I don't know what it is, but Junior Marshal Brother should know. Lu Yi thought for a moment and took out a formation disc from his storage space and handed it to his Senior Marshal Brother. Feng Wujiang took it suspiciously and tried to inject spirit energy into it. In an instant, the formation disc was activated and an invisible energy surged out, enveloping Lu Yi and Feng Wujiang. Feng Wujiang's expression shook. This is, carefully sensing it, he could clearly sense the effect of this invisible energy. Under the guidance of this energy, his and Lu Ye's aura seemed to be very light. Great God Momos, the Great Sage of Human Tao, is the soonest update. Chapter 1032, Great Sage, the Wondrous Uses of Formation Discs, the Jade Blood Sacred Land. Moreover, he felt that he could borrow power from Lu Yi as long as Lu Yi didn't resist. At the same time, Lu Yi had a similar feeling. In his perception, his Senior Marshal Brother beside him contained an extremely terrifying power. It was a power that Lu Yi didn't dare to borrow. If he used it rashly, his body wouldn't be able to withstand it. Calming himself down, Lu Yi said, the Twin Qi and Branch Formation Disc contains a spirit pattern called Twin Qi and Branch Formation. Within the range of the spirit pattern, everyone can easily borrow power from each other. Lu Yi had improved this formation disc many times. Now the formation disc could cover a wider range and had practical use. It was no longer like the first time he made it, where it could only cover a range of 10 feet. Now the formation disc could cover a range of 15 feet. 15 feet wasn't small. It could be used to save lives at a critical moment. Feng Wujiang's eyes flashed. He quickly realized the wondrous use of this formation disc. Borrowing power is only secondary. If we use this formation disc to form a formation, Lu Yi nodded. I've also considered this. Different formations require different numbers of cultivators to form. Generally speaking, only cultivators who were familiar with each other, cooperated with each other, and could trust each other could form a formation. Moreover, it required a lot of practice. Therefore, formations were rarely seen in battlefields between two factions. Most cultivators simply cooperated with each other. This was because not just anyone could form a formation with others to fight against the enemy. To see the soonest update of The Great Sage of Human Tao, Great God Momo's, The Great Sage of Human Tao, is the soonest update. Chapter 1032, Great Sage of Human Tao, The Wondrous Uses of Formation Discs. Chapter 1033. If different cultivators wanted to form a formation, the first thing they needed to do was to connect their auras. However, auras were invisible and formless. Everyone was different, so it was naturally very difficult to connect their auras. Therefore, many large sects would have a group of people specifically responsible for practicing formations. These people generally didn't have bad aptitudes. If their cultivation wasn't high enough, it would be useless for them to form a formation. However, it also wouldn't be too high. Cultivators with high aptitudes would rather cultivate alone and increase their cultivation if they had the time to practice formations. Generally speaking, these people were those who were neither high nor low in their respective sections. After they formed a formation, they would be able to display power that surpassed their own level, increasing the foundation and strength of their sections. Within the 9 provinces, it was very rare to see formations on the front lines where the two factions were fighting. This was because casualties were frequent on the front lines. It wasn't easy to practice formations, but if they were damaged in a great battle, all of their previous practice would become meaningless. Therefore, although formations were very useful, it often required a large amount of manpower, energy, and even time. As a result, there weren't many cultivators in the 9 provinces who were willing to practice formations. However, what if there was something in this world that could allow people to easily connect their auras without the need for long periods of practice and without the need for too much reliance and trust between them? Then they could easily form a formation to defend against the enemy. The twin chi-linked formation disc was such an item that could assist them. It had to be said that Feng Wujiang's experience was still more extensive than Lu Ye's. Lu Ye's original intention of refining the twin chi-linked formation disc was to let the cultivators within the disc's range borrow each other's strength. It was only later that he realized that it could be used to form a formation. However, Feng Wujiang saw the greatest use of this item with a single glance. It wasn't used to borrow strength, but to assist cultivators in forming a formation. Moreover, if this item was used to form a formation, the effect might be better than just forming a formation. This was because cultivators could borrow strength from each other in a formation. If cultivators were said to be cigarette parts, then the twin chi-linked formation disc could easily fit these parts together, forming an inseparable whole. It could be said that the appearance of such an item could play an immeasurable role in a large-scale battle. As long as there were enough twin chi-linked formation discs, the overall strength of the Jade Blood Holy Land could increase by at least 30% or even more. This was extremely important to the current situation of the Blue Blood Holy Land. Over the past few decades, the Jade Blood Holy Land had not been able to nurture many powerful cultivators. However, with the massive population base, there were also many human cultivators. There were Cloud River tier cultivators and True Lake tier cultivators, and the twin chi-connected formation disc was suitable for them to use. Is it difficult to refine it? Feng Wujiang asked. Not at all. Lu Yi shook his head. How difficult was it to refine the array disc? Branding the spirit branch spirit veins on it was even easier. I'll take it and study it first. Feng Wujiang stood up. Junior brother, rest for now. I'll talk to you later. The appearance of the twin chi-connected spirit array disc undoubtedly made Feng Wujiang very excited. He couldn't wait to have his subordinates refine more in preparation for the upcoming battle. After giving these instructions, he soared into the sky and flew in a certain direction. Lu Yi could only swallow the words that were at the tip of his tongue. He really wanted to tell eldest senior brother that it wasn't difficult for him to refine that thing, but that might not be the case for others. The core of that thing wasn't a formation disk, but a spirit vein. Such a complex spirit vein wasn't something that just anyone could brand during the refining process. After eldest senior brother left, a green-robed man walked over and cupped his fists. "Sir, the Holy Lord has asked me to take you to rest." Lu Yi nodded slightly. "Lead the way." After a short while, the green-robed man led him into a large hall and settled him down. He had been travel-worn for the past half a year. If he hadn't met Jianghu and the others, he would have had to travel for more than a month to reach the Shenkai Sea. He was indeed a bit tired. After sitting cross-legged for a while, Lu Yi suddenly opened his eyes. He felt like he had forgotten something, but when he thought about it carefully, he couldn't remember what it was. He couldn't be bothered to think about it. When the time came, he would naturally remember it. Return at the foot of the mountain, Dao Shisan was sleeping soundly. When he opened his eyes, Lu Yi was already gone. He stood up and scratched his head. He didn't know what to do, so he just stood there like a wooden stake and waited. His thoughts were simple. If he couldn't find Lu Yi would come looking for him. He had to admit that not having high intelligence wasn't necessarily a bad thing. At the very least, he would have no worries. At the same time, somewhere at the foot of the sacred mountain, clinking sounds could be heard. Most of them were bare-chested men, sweating profusely. The surrounding environment was hot, and from time to time, scorching flames would erupt. This was the Holy Land's refining workshop. It was specifically responsible for refining spirit treasures for divine sea realm cultivators. Feng Wujiang stood next to a skinny old man. That old man was the same as Jianghu and the others. His hair and beard were all white. Although he was skinny, his bare upper body was well defined. In his hand was a hammer larger than his head. In his other hand he held the formation disc that Feng Wujiang took from Lu Yi. He activated both his divine will and spirit treasure to sense the structure of the disc. The skinny old man's name was Ouyangzi. He wasn't a sect leader. 300 years ago he was the head refiner of the Tianji Business Alliance. He had refined countless spirit treasures in his life. Not only did he come from the Tianji Business Alliance, but many of the refiners gathered here were also from the Tianji Business Alliance. Although they were all powerful, they had never fought with others. After a long time, Ouyangzi opened his eyes with a serious expression. Feng Wujiang immediately asked, "Senior, can this be refined in large quantities?" Ouyangzi looked at him and weighed the hammer in his hand. He silently estimated the difference in strength between him and Feng Wujiang and gave up on hammering his head. He frowned and said, "Where did the Sacred Lord find this thing? How could such a thing be refined in large quantities?" In the entire workshop, he was probably the only one who had the ability to refine such a thing. And the success rate was very, very small. "What's wrong?" Feng Wujiang noticed that something was wrong with Ouyangzi's expression. The method used to refine this disc is a bit immature, but it can be seen that it has been passed down from generation to generation. The refiner must have been taught by a great master. But what puzzles this old man is that this kind of refining technique shouldn't have been able to imprint such a complicated spirit inscription on the disc. Ouyangzi had spent his entire life refining artifacts, so his eyes were naturally sharp. Lu Ye's refining technique was indeed immature. In his eyes, such a disc array was a defective product with many flaws, but it was still something that could be used. Judging from the refining technique, the refiner must have been taught by a very powerful refiner. But the key to this object wasn't the disc itself, but the spirit inscription on it. He had been shocked by the complexity and precision of the spirit inscription just now. He had never seen or heard of such a spirit inscription before, so he didn't know what it was used for. If he simply had to use his spirit chi to construct the spirit inscription, he had a conservative estimate of a 30% chance of success. But if he had to imprint the spirit inscription on the disc at the same time as he was refining artifacts, he wouldn't even have a 5% chance of success. It was almost impossible. "Who refined this disc?" Ouyangzi asked. In the sacred land, there shouldn't be anyone who could refine it, so he couldn't help but be curious. "My junior brother refined it." The Sacred Lord's junior brother? Ouyangzi was confused. He had never heard of the Sacred Lord having a junior brother. "He's from the 9 states. Ouyangzi suddenly understood. Did the 9 states Tianji send someone here again? And at this time? He couldn't help but think of many things. "Your junior brother is very skilled in refining artifacts. If it's convenient, could the Sacred Lord take this old man to see him? I have some things to ask him." He mainly wanted to see with his own eyes how the Sacred Lord's junior brother had successfully imprinted the spirit inscription on the disc. Feng Wujiang was surprised. Senior, if you want to see him, I'll bring him here later. You can teach him a thing or two. It was somewhat inconceivable. One had to know that in the Tao of artifact refining, Ouyangzi was already the most powerful person he had ever seen. In this Tao, Ouyangzi was also very proud of himself, and he had never heard of him asking for advice from anyone. Senior, can't this be mass-produced? Feng Wujiang asked again. He felt something unusual from Ouyangzi's tone. Ouyangzi couldn't help but weigh the hammer in his hand. I can't refine this thing, let alone mass-produce it. Feng Wujiang was stunned. Even Senior can't refine it? Ouyangzi said, it's easy to refine a disc, but I can't imprint the spirit inscription on it. It was too complicated. He had to spend a lot of time studying it. Even so, it didn't increase the success rate by much. Feng Wujiang frowned as he walked out of the workshop. That's not right. Junior brother clearly said that it wasn't difficult to refine this thing. Why did Senior Ouyangzi say that he couldn't refine it? It didn't make sense that his junior brother's artifact refining skills were inferior to Ouyangzi's. It had to be better. He wanted to ask about it now, but considering that Lu Yi had rushed all the way here and was probably resting, there was no need to rush. It wasn't until the next day that Lu Yi suddenly remembered that he was missing someone. He hurriedly went down the mountain to look for him. He saw Dao 13 standing there motionlessly. Sensing Lu Ye's aura, Dao 13 immediately looked over with a resentful expression. Lu Yi gave him a look and Dao Shirsan followed closely behind. When he returned to the mountain, he didn't know how to find eldest senior brother. There weren't many buildings on the mountain peak. There were only a few big buildings and a few side rooms. It seemed that the cultivators from the 9 states didn't live here. The azure-robed man from yesterday was still there. Lu Yi went up and asked, "Where's the sacred lord?" The azure-robed man replied, "The sacred lord went to the surrounding islands to investigate the fortifications. Before he left, he said that if you're well rested, you should wait for him on the mountain." Chapter 1034. Strike 010 got into the car and started to wander around the holy mountain. There were only a few big buildings here. There were only a few rooms in the hall. He could see everything at a glance. However, he was new here and couldn't run around casually. He could only pass the time like this. As he passed by a large hall, Lu Yi casually glanced at it and suddenly stopped. Then he strode into the hall. The hall was empty. There was only a pillar-shaped object standing in the middle of the hall. The 10 spirits elite cultivators excitedly came in front of the pillar-shaped object, their faces filled with nostalgia. It had been a long time since he had seen this thing. The creatures of the blood refinement realm might not recognize the object in front of them, but for the cultivators from the 9 regions who didn't know, it was a pillar of heaven's secrets. In fact, after coming to the blood refinement realm, Lu Yi was thinking about the purpose of the 9 regions' heavenly secrets to send him here. He was also thinking about how to return to the 9 regions. He couldn't stay here forever. Since the heavenly secrets could send him here, there must be a way. Let him go back. However, the situation this time was different from the last time he entered the Wushuang continent. When he entered the Wushuang continent, he carried 4 divine pillars with him. With the divine pillars he could contact the 9 regions. However, he didn't expect that there would be one on the holy mountain. With the divine pillar, why would he need to worry about how to go back? With the help of the divine pillar, he could complete the teleportation. He could buy some cultivation materials from the divine treasure house. Recently, he lacked cultivation materials. This was also the main reason why his cultivation progress was slow. He raised his hand and pressed on the divine pillar. His mind surged and connected to the divine pillar. Lu Yi frowned. There was no reaction. He connected again, but there was still no reaction. This was the first time he had encountered something like this. Every cultivator of the 9 regions had the ability to connect to the divine pillar. It was also the right given to the cultivators of the 9 regions by the divine pillar. There was no reason for there to be no reaction. However, Lu Yi tried several times, but it was still useless. "Junior brother." Feng Wujiang's voice came from behind. Lu Yi turned his head and asked Jie Jun, "Eldest senior brother, why can't you use the divine pillar?" Feng Wujiang explained, "Junior brother, you may not know this, but this place is not like the 9 prefectures. The Tianji pillar here can only be activated once every 5 years, and it will last for about the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. After that, a large amount of resources will be sent over from the 9 prefectures. After that, it will be in a state of silence." Lu Yi couldn't help being stunned. He hadn't expected this to be the case. Previously he was still wondering how human cultivators could cultivate in the blood refining realm if there were no suitable materials for human cultivators to cultivate, such as spirit stones and the like. After all, he couldn't completely rely on absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It turned out that the 9 prefectures would send resources here. There's still about a year before the next activation of the Tianji pillar. Naturally you can't use it now. Why is this happening? Lu Yi was puzzled. I don't know the specific reason, but I guess it's probably related to the will of heaven and earth in this world. When the 9 regions Tianji sent us here, they did some concealment to prevent the will of heaven and earth in this world from detecting our invasion. The Tianji pillar's Rongma is probably the same. If it remains open all year round, the will of heaven and earth in this world will be able to trace the existence of the 9 regions in reverse. That's why it's activated once every 5 years, and the duration of each activation is not too long. Lu Yi looked pensive. Junior Marshal Brother, what do you want to buy? Feng Wujiang asked. I'm short on cultivation resources, so I wanted to exchange for some. Feng Wujiang smiled. If that's the case, I'll give you some. I'll send some over to you. There are still some leftovers from the last batch. Okay. Lu Yi nodded. Then he asked, by the way, Senior Marshal Brother, do the sacred ground have blood crystals? Yes, Junior Marshal Brother wants those? In the past few decades, the Blood Race army had besieged the sacred ground several times. The number wasn't small. Xuezi Yuquan Fuhai had died. Xing Shua Dayan's body had been destroyed in year X6. However, some of the Blood Race had also died in the outer islands. The blood crystals of the Blood Race had been taken out and collected by human cultivators. Originally, the sacred ground wanted to study how to use the energy of the blood crystals to set up a formation. However, the energy in the blood crystals was also somewhat corrosive. It wasn't appropriate to use them to set up a formation, so they kept them. After every battle, the sacred ground would collect a large number of blood crystals. However, they couldn't use them, so they collected more and more blood crystals. Now, the sacred ground had a special warehouse used to store blood crystals. Blood crystals of different sizes and qualities could be said to be piled up like a mountain. Xian said that Grado was a dying pill, but to him it was a good pill. As long as he had enough blood crystals, he would be able to break through to the true lake realm and break through to the divine sea realm. I'll have someone send them to you later. Feng Wujiang said and called out, follow me, there's someone who wants to see you. Lu Yi followed behind Feng Wujiang. After a while, Lu Yi met Ouyang Zi in the artifact refining workshop. Feng Wujiang introduced them to each other. After learning that Ouyang Zi was the chief artifact refining master of the Heavenly Secret Commerce Alliance several hundred years ago, Lu Yi was filled with respect. The Heavenly Secret Commerce Alliance was a colossus with many talents under its banner. For Ouyang Zi to become the chief artifact refining master, his artifact refining level was naturally extremely high. It wasn't something that a dabbler like him could compare to. In the end, he had only studied the artifact refining Dao with Kong Kong for 2 months in the Sword Artifact Sect's sealed world. Even if he had some talent in this field, it was impossible for him to have high attainments in artifact refining without years of immersion. Ouyang Zi was even more surprised, mainly because Lu Yi was too young. Yesterday, when he heard Feng Wujiang say that the twin spirit-connected spirit array was refined by his junior brother, Ouyang Zi thought that since he was Feng Wujiang's junior brother, he should be in his early 50s. But the young man in front of him was clearly in his early 20s. You refined this thing? Ouyang Zi held the array plate in his hand, his eyes still a little red. It seemed that he didn't rest well yesterday. Junior refined it. Lu Yi nodded. Refine another one for me to see. Ouyang Zi had a look of disbelief, mainly because he couldn't believe it. At Lu Ye's age, even if he started learning the artifact refining Dao in his mother's womb, it was impossible for him to completely brand such complex spirit inscriptions into an array plate. Lu Yi turned his head to look at Feng Wujiang, who nodded, Junior brother, please refine one. Since eldest senior brother had spoken, Lu Yi naturally wouldn't refuse, taking out some materials from his storage space and condensing his spirit chi into a flame, which he then used to refine them. With his current True Lake Realm 8th Order cultivation, he could already refine some simple artifacts out of thin air, which was how he had refined the previous array plate. Under his control, the impurities were constantly separated and the prototype of an array plate slowly appeared. After a short while, Lu Yi withdrew his spirit chi and a brand new twin spirit-connected spirit array was produced. He handed it to Ouyang Zi. Ouyang Zi took it and used his spirit chi and divine sense to investigate its interior, a look of disbelief appearing on his face as he muttered, "This doesn't make sense. He had seen Lu Ye's refining technique and felt that it was really immature. In terms of quality, the array plate in his hand was barely passable. How could such artifact refining skills be able to completely brand such complex spirit inscriptions into it? Such an array plate was really a bit shabby on the outside but with a golden interior. It didn't look special from the outside, but all the good stuff was inside. Lu Ye knew why he was surprised, so he explained, "Senior, I am a spirit tattooist. Constructing spirit inscriptions is nothing to me." Even though he said so, Ouyangzi still had a look of amazement on his face. It's really amazing. He had seen spiritual tattooists before, but none of the spiritual tattooists he had seen had such a bizarre ability. "Little friend, can you teach this old man the construction of this spirit inscriptions?" Ouyangzi's attitude was clearly much more polite. Although he could sense the complete structure of the Link Chi spirit rune through his spiritual sense and spiritual energy, the difficulty of constructing a spirit rune was different. He wanted to know how Lu Yi constructed this spirit rune and learn a thing or two from it. Perhaps he would be able to gain something. He had studied this array plate for a whole day yesterday, so he naturally knew the magical uses of this array plate. It could be said that this thing was a killing weapon in a large-scale battle and would play an irreplaceable role in the Holy Land's defense against the Blood Race army. He naturally wanted to refine this item himself and let the human cultivators in the Holy Land be equipped with it. No problem. Lu Yi agreed immediately. Then the old man and the young man gathered together and chatted. Lu Yi would occasionally show Ouyangzi the construction of the spirit inscriptions. Feng Wujiang stood at the side and waited silently. Dao Shisan stood beside him like a wooden pillar. A few hours later, Feng Wujiang led Lu Yi out of the crafting workshop, leaving behind Ouyangzi, whose face was full of bitterness and hatred. He realized that Lu Yi constructed the spirit inscriptions as easily as eating and drinking. However, when it was his turn, he kept making mistakes and would often make mistakes. This was how spirit inscriptions were constructed. In order to successfully construct a spirit inscriptions, there couldn't be the slightest mistake in the entire process. Even the slightest mistake in yin and yang would cause the entire spirit inscriptions to collapse. This was also the reason why there were so few spirit tattooists in the 9 provinces. Formation masters, refiners, and even alchemists of UU3 were semi-proficient in the construction of spirit inscriptions. It was convenient for them to set up formations, refine weapons, or refine pills. However, spirit tattoos were a very specific field of expertise, and they would construct the spirit tattoos they used most often. They weren't like spirit tattooists who could easily construct any type of spirit tattoo. As for Senior Ouyang, I probably can't count on him. Feng Wujiang also saw some things. In the way of weapon refinement, Ouyangzi was second to none. Even in the current 9 provinces, there weren't many who could compare to him in terms of weapon refinement. However, everyone had their own specialties, and the extremely complicated spirit pattern of the same spirit pattern was undoubtedly an insurmountable hurdle for Ouyangzi. Perhaps in the future he could slowly practice to increase the success rate of this spirit inscriptions and use it in refining weapons. However, the Holy Land lacked time. Within 2 months, the Blood Race army would invade. It was useless to count on Ouyangzi. Chapter 1035. Junior brother, can you be in charge of refining that formation plate? Feng Wujiang asked. No problem, that's what I was thinking. Okay, I'll get someone to send the materials to you later. Feng Wujiang was overjoyed. Just now he had seen Lu Yi forge the formation plate effortlessly. He didn't even need to spend much effort to forge one formation plate. In this way he would be able to forge at least 200 formation plates in a day. There was enough time. Feng Wujiang walked in another direction. Soon they arrived at a cave at the foot of the holy mountain. There were a few cultivators there. When they saw Feng Wujiang they all bowed. Holy Master. Feng Wujiang nodded his head and led Lu Yi inside. At first they went straight ahead and then they looked at Madanji 1R. They went deep into the ground and came to a huge place. Inside the cave there were flickering flames around the cave. It wasn't dark at all. Lu Yi looked around and saw that every gate in the cave had a large water tank-like container placed in front of it. A water tank. There were also round things in the tanks. At first he didn't see what those round things were, but when he focused his vision he was slightly shocked. Senior brother, these are Dao soldiers. Feng Wujiang stood beside Lu Yi with his hands behind his back and replied softly. So many? Lu Yi exclaimed. There were nearly 100 water vats in the cave, and the round objects he saw were actually heads. More importantly, there were long and pointed ears on both sides of those heads. These Dao soldiers were clearly not humans but blood kindred. In the past few decades, The Holy Land and the Blood Kindred had fought several times. Each time the Blood Kindred suffered heavy losses. Naturally, many Blood Kindred were captured by the Holy Land. The captured Blood Kindred were all refined into Dao soldiers by Feng Wujiang, which was what Lu Yi saw. He had obtained the refining method of Dao soldiers from somewhere in the 9 states back then. Taishan also knew how to refine Dao soldiers from him. If Taishan could refine Dao soldiers, he could too. It was just that back then he felt that things like Dao soldiers were too harmful, so he never refined them. However, he was clearly not a pedantic person who didn't know how to be flexible. Using humans to refine Dao soldiers was harmful, but using Blood Kindred to refine them was no problem. He had selected many of the Blood Clan members who had been captured alive over the years with decent aptitudes to refine Dao weapons. However, the casualty rate of refining Dao soldiers was ridiculously high. The birth of a Dao soldier was less than 1 in 100. Over the past few decades, only 100 Dao soldiers had been born. Lu Yi went to the nearest water tank to investigate and found that it was filled with a strange liquid. There was a thick medicinal fragrance, and she had no idea how it had been concocted. A vampire was sitting inside with his eyes closed, and only his head was above the water. His breathing was almost non-existent, but Lu Yi could sense that he was not dead. These are all considered finished Dao soldiers. However, because they are members of the Blood Clan, although they were successfully refined, they were born with a rebellious nature. Under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be too much of a problem. However, if they were attacked or suffered too much pain, it is very likely that they would betray the Blood Clan. They cannot be used in battle, so they have been sealed here. Lu Yi immediately reacted, "Senior Martial Brother wants me to enslave them?" Feng Wujiang nodded. "I originally thought that these Dao soldiers would not be of much use, but since Junior Martial Brother has the ability to control people's minds, perhaps I can give them to you." Yesterday, when he heard that Lu Yi had such a method, Feng Wujiang immediately thought of these sealed Dao soldiers. It was a pity that these Dao soldiers could not be used because of some concerns. "No problem," Lu Yi agreed readily. "However, Junior Martial Brother, are you sure this method will work on these Blood Clan members? You can't be careless about this. Every Dao soldier here has a higher cultivation than you. If they betray their master, it won't be a joke." "They are all in the Divine Sea Realm?" Lu Yi was shocked. Feng Wujiang nodded. "They are all in the Divine Sea Realm." The Blood Clan members he had selected were all very suitable for refining Dao soldiers. They also had secret arts to catalyze and squeeze out their potential. It was not a problem for them to reach the Divine Sea Realm after a few decades. However, the price was that these Dao soldiers' intelligence was damaged, and there was no possibility for them to improve anymore, just like Dao 13. Lu Yi raised his eyes and looked around. Hundreds of Dao soldiers meant hundreds of Divine Sea Realm cultivators. Even if these Dao soldiers were not high in the Divine Sea Realm, a Divine Sea Realm cultivator was still a Divine Sea Realm cultivator. Such a force would definitely be of great help to the Blue Blood Holy Land. "That's why I have to be sure that Junior Martial Brother's method is correct." "Absolutely not," Lu Yi promised. "Senior Martial Brother may not know, but my method is actually a divine rune. If it is a Divine Sea Realm cultivator with normal intelligence, there may be a chance it will betray their master, but against these Dao soldiers with damaged intelligence, it has absolute control and suppression." "Divine rune?" Feng Wujiang was surprised. Isn't that, although he was not a spirit tattoo master, he still knew what a divine rune was. It could only be constructed by one's divine sense. Lu Yi was clearly just a true Lake Realm cultivator. Halfway through his words, Feng Wujiang felt a divine sense spread out from Lu Yi. "Junior Martial Brother, you actually have divine sense." Feng Wujiang was really shocked this time. Even he had never seen such a bizarre thing. How could a true Lake Realm cultivator develop divine sense? Even if his Junior Martial Brother was already a true Lake Realm 8th Order cultivator, there was no precedent in this world for a true Lake Realm cultivator to develop a soul body. "I once had a chance to obtain a lot of soul cleansing water. After consuming it for a long time, my soul became stronger. Later on, by chance, I developed a soul body and developed divine sense." There was no need to hide too much in front of his eldest Senior Martial Brother. Moreover, his second Senior Martial sister and Yan Yuxian also knew about this. Moreover, his eldest Senior Martial Brother would be able to sense it when he used some method to enslave these Dao soldiers. Feng Wujiang did not know what to say. He thought that his life experience was bizarre enough, but he did not expect Lu Yi to be even more bizarre. Calming himself down, Feng Wujiang said, "Then let me see Junior Martial Brother's method." Lu Yi smiled and raised his hand to touch the Dao soldier's forehead. urging it with his divine sense. The Dao soldier was in a deep sleep. It was obviously Feng Wujiang's method. It was similar to yesterday when he made Dao 13 lose his ability to move and fall into a deep sleep. Naturally, there was no resistance to Lu Ye's method. In addition, the Dao soldier's intelligence was lacking, so the soul manipulation technique was successfully constructed. After a few breaths of time, Lu Yi withdrew his hand. Feng Wujiang turned to look at him, a look of inquiry on his face. Lu Yi said, "That's enough. Senior martial brother, wake him up." Feng Wujiang walked behind the Dao soldier and pressed his hand to the back of the Dao soldier's head. It was unknown what he did, but as he activated his spiritual power, the sleeping Dao soldier suddenly woke up. In the dim environment, the Dao soldier's eyes were like two rays of blood-red light. He then stood up, his spiritual power surging uncontrollably. The large vat he was in shattered, and the medicinal liquid inside flowed all over the ground. Feng Wujiang watched silently, waiting for the Dao soldier to make any inappropriate movements. He would immediately attack and kill him. However, the Dao soldier only glanced left and right before obediently standing in front of Lu Yi. He lowered his head, looking very respectful. The chaotic spiritual power in his body also slowly calmed down. After confirming that there were no problems with the Dao soldier, Feng Wujiang finally relaxed. Lu Yi had already walked towards the other vat, following the same pattern. Walking down the road, person 01, a sleeping Dao soldier awoke. From start to finish, it took less than half an hour. Lu Yi had planted the soul-controlling divine soul in all of them. Almost every Dao soldier would be a little confused on the first day they woke up. This was the aftereffect of meditating on the stone blade for a long time. They would instinctively move. Instinctively. In comparison, their cultivations were very clear to Lu Yi. Eldest senior brother was right. These Dao soldiers were all at the soul-stabilizing C realm, none below the divine C realm. Their cultivation levels were also very average, basically concentrated between the second order and fourth order divine C realm. There were very few fifth order, only 5. Dao 13 was also at the fifth order divine C realm. From this point of view, although this method of refining Dao soldiers was useful, it had too many flaws and the failure rate was extremely high. Failure meant death. This could be seen from the number of Dao soldiers in front of him. Although Lu Yi didn't know how many blood race cultivators Feng Wujiang had captured over the years, standing in front of him, there were only 100 or so. These Dao soldiers will be handed over to junior brother in the future, Feng Wujiang said. Senior brother can rest assured, I will make sure they display their worth. Let's go. The 3 of them came in, but when they left it was a mighty group. Feng Wujiang still had something to do, so he left first. Lu Yi led a large group of blood race cultivators back to the top of the holy mountain, startling the blue-robed servant, who subconsciously thought that the blood race had invaded. In the room, the blue-robed servant trembled as he walked in. I'm holding a robe in my hand. Yuan, this is what the holy master ordered me to give to you. Lu Yi reached out and took it. Thank you for your hard work. It's no trouble. The blue-robed servant squeezed out a smile and bolted out, disappearing in a puff of smoke. There was no other way. There were hundreds of blood-race divine sea realm cultivators standing in front of Lu Ye's door, all of them silent and gloomy, which was a bit scary. In the room, Lu Yi checked the contents of the storage bags. 2 of them were filled with various materials for refining array discs, while the other 2 were filled with blood crystals. Lu Yi poured out one of the bags of blood crystals, which immediately piled up into a small mountain beside him. Looking at these blood crystals, Lu Yi let out a long sigh. Now, he didn't lack the resources to break through to the 9th order True Lake realm. Not only were there a lot of blood crystals, but their quality was also good. Lu Yi picked up one of them and felt the surging energy contained in it. He immediately concluded that this was a blood crystal of a blood race cultivator of the Divine Sea realm. He had never obtained a blood crystal of a blood race cultivator of the Divine Sea realm. There were many blood race cultivators who died in the islands around the Holy Land, so naturally, there was no lack of Divine Sea realm cultivators. He directly threw it into his mouth and chewed. It still had the same texture, crunchy but tasteless. Feeling the energy in the blood crystal, Lu Yi was extremely satisfied. He directly jumped up and sat on the hill-like blood crystal, urging the power of his talent tree. Invisible roots stretched out and probed into the blood crystal beside him, devouring it to its heart's content. Chapter 1036. Over the next few days, Lu Yi activated the power of his talent tree to devour blood crystals while refining array discs. Almost every day there were nearly 200 formation discs being refined. Feng Wujiang would come to him every 2 days to take away the array discs he refined. Even though he stayed in his room all the time, Lu Yi still felt a sense of urgency. He knew that there wasn't much time left for the Holy Land. The Blood Race's army of over 1 million was definitely on the way, and it wouldn't be long before they reached the city gates. At that time, the Holy Land's survival would be decided in a single day. A month passed in the blink of an eye. During this period of time, Lu Yelu had continuously refined more than 5,000 to 6,000 formation discs, and the number of blood crystals he had devoured was incalculable. He didn't need to continue refining array discs because he already had enough. Now he could fully immerse himself in his cultivation. Another 10 days passed and the spiritual energy in his body became even purer. After 9 revolutions of spiritual energy, an invisible wave of air swept out, and Lu Yi slowly opened his eyes. True Lake Realm 9th Order. He was only 1 step away from the Spirit Sea Realm. There wasn't much time left for him to cultivate to the Spirit Sea Realm. Moreover, the war with the Blood Race was about to begin, so he didn't have the mood to continue cultivating. He didn't get up immediately and instead spent 2 days consolidating his cultivation. Then he walked out of the room and found the blue-clothed attendant who had been staying on the Holy Mountain. He asked him to find some materials for him. The blue-clothed attendant naturally obeyed. The reason he stayed here was because he received Feng Wujiang's order to satisfy all of Lu Ye's needs. 2 hours later, the blue-clothed attendant brought all the materials Lu Yi needed and Lu Yi began to refine them. The blue-clothed attendant was curious and asked, "Sir, what are you doing?" Lu Yi explained, "For tattooing." "Tattooing?" The blue-clothed attendant was puzzled. "What was that?" "You'll know when you see it." Lu Yi didn't explain and asked casually, "What's the situation of the enemy?" The blue-clothed attendant's expression turned serious. "I heard from the Holy Master that the Blood Race's army has begun to cross the Divine Gate Sea. They will attack us in 6 or 7 days. Lu Yi nodded. There was still enough time. Half a day later, all the materials were mixed. Lu Yi waved at Dao 13, who was standing at the side, and Dao 13 walked over obediently. "Take off your shirt and lie down." Lu Yi pointed at the wooden bed in front of him. Dao 13 did as he was told. When everything was ready, Lu Yi took out the set of needles given to him by his master and began to inscribe spirit marks on Dao Shisan's body. Naturally, it was the twin chi-connected branch spirit tattoo. Although he already had the kindred chi connection array disc, he only needed to be within the range of the array disc's power to connect with his companion's auras and easily form an array. However, there was a drawback to this, and that was that the disc array could be seized by the enemy and used by the enemy. Moreover, in the midst of a great battle, once the formation plate was shattered, the formation would collapse without the need to attack. After all, the formation plate itself was not something particularly sturdy. However, it was a different story if it was tattooed. There was absolutely no possibility of it being seized or broken, unless the owner died. Lu Yi planned to inscribe the twin chi-connected branch spirit tattoo on Dao Shisan and his blood slaves. This way they could replace the formation plate. It could also be said that each of them was a formation plate that could connect with other people's auras at will. It could even be said that if these soul slaves were scattered among the human cultivators, they could also replace the formation plate. At a critical moment they might be able to play a miraculous role. It had been a long time since Lu Yi studied the Tao of Inscription. The last time he studied it was when he was in the spiritual land of Huitian Valley in the Cloud River battlefield. Ever since he embarked on the path of cultivation with the Tao of Inscription as his foundation, he had come into contact with too many outer Tao, such as the Tao of Formation, the Tao of Inscription, the Tao of Refining, and so on. He might come into contact with more in the future, but a person's energy was limited. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be proficient in everything. The only result of being proficient in everything was that he was proficient in everything. Cultivation was what he needed to do the most. Perhaps one day when his cultivation base could no longer improve, he would study more outer Tao. However, that was not the case now. Although his attainment in the Tao of Inscription was sloppy, it was not too difficult for him to inscribe thanks to the talent tree. Otherwise, he would not have chosen Dao Shisan as his first target. The servant in green stood at the side and watched as Lu Ye's hand danced in the air. The Tao of Inscription gradually formed a complicated inscription diagram on Dao Shisan's chest. He could not help but gasp in amazement. Not long after, Dao Shisan stood up and put on his clothes again. Lu Yi summoned another Blood Clan soul slave and did the same thing. Not all the Blood Clan soul slaves were inscribed on their chests. Some of them were female, so they could only choose to inscribe on their backs. The uneven chests would also affect the performance of his Tao of inscription. It took Lu Yi 2 days to inscribe all the Blood Clan soul slaves. Then he began to train them. The so-called training was nothing more than letting them familiarize themselves with the evolution of the formation. Lu Yi had long since obtained many practice methods of formations from his eldest senior brother in preparation for today. There was the Black Tortoise Moon-Gazing formation that leaned towards defense, the White Tiger Heaven-Smashing formation that leaned towards killing, and the Azure Dragon 7 Mansions formation that was unpredictable. The names of these formations sounded very powerful. It seemed that the effects would not be too bad in a real battle. Moreover, depending on the number of people, the formation would be different. If there were only 2 people, they could form the 2 dragons emerging from the water formation. Above that, there was the Heaven and Earth Tripartite formation, the Level 4 Tusita formation, and the 9 Palace Chain formation with 9 people. The 9 states Tianji had sent many people to the blood refinement realm over the past few hundred years. Each of them was knowledgeable and experienced. These formations were provided by the old seniors and included at least 1,000 years' worth of essence in the 9 states. Under normal circumstances, it was basically an impossible task to familiarize oneself with the changes of a formation in such a short time, even if the people forming the formation were familiar with each other. Not to mention Dao Bing, who had a lack of intelligence, would never be able to understand what a formation was. However, with the help of kindred spirit, the Dao soldiers' practice was actually quite good. The most difficult thing for a cultivator to form a formation was to connect their qi. Everyone's qi was different. If they wanted to connect their qi, they had to accommodate and fit together, just like the yin and yang in the construction of the inscription diagram. Every spiritual pattern was formed by combining countless yin and yang elements in different ways. Only then could it form a whole. The twin qi shared branch spirit tattoo had perfectly resolved this greatest difficulty, and the rest was naturally easy. After practicing for several days, Lu Yi led a group of Dao Bing and valiantly flew out of the sacred mountain. After asking for the location of the eldest senior brother, Lu Yi rushed there. After a while, he saw the figure of the eldest senior brother on a small island in the periphery. There was a city on the small island, but it was not used for people to live. All the humans in the sacred mountain were gathered on the large island in the center. The small islands in the periphery and even the cities on the islands were just defensive structures. Many human cultivators in the city were busy making the final preparations before the battle. Feng Wujiang stood on the city wall. There were at least 70 to 80 people around him, either sitting or standing. The eldest senior brother was obviously assigning the defense tasks. At this moment, those who were qualified to stand beside him were all top cultivators from the 9 states. After decades of development, although there were many Divine Sea Realm cultivators, their cultivation was not too high and they were not qualified to attend such an occasion. When Lu Yi arrived, many pairs of eyes immediately looked over. There was no pressure, but Lu Yi still felt the pressure as heavy as a mountain. Looking up, he saw that almost all of these people had snow-white hair and beards. There were few middle-aged people. On the other hand, there were a few female cultivators who maintained themselves like Yuji. They looked youthful and beautiful. Mixed in such a group of people, they really stood out from the crowd. Lu Yi saw Jianghu Hong, Wu Chang, Meng Jie and Granny Jiao in the crowd. When he landed, a large group of Dao Bing also landed behind him. They all had dull expressions and dull eyes. In comparison, Dao 13 was undoubtedly more normal. "Sacred Lord, this is your mysterious junior brother?" a white-haired old man asked. The others looked up and down at Lu Yi with interest. Feng Wujiang laughed and put his arm around Lu Ye's shoulder affectionately. "Yes, this is my junior brother. Seniors, what do you think? The new generation surpasses the old, right?" Lu Yi hurriedly bowed. Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect of the War State greets the seniors. His attitude was extremely respectful. It couldn't be helped. The people here were all real seniors. Every one of them was a hero in their own era. They were people who stirred up the 9 regions. Regardless of whether they were from the Haotian Alliance or the Myriad Demons Ridge, they were all on the same side. Lu Yi actually liked this kind of atmosphere. Everyone worked together for the same goal, and there was no misunderstanding between them. Unlike in the 9 states, even if they were from the same camp, there were many open and secret struggles. There was no personal enmity between the Z arts of the different camps. It was just that there was conflict between camps. There was a reason to fight. The white-haired old man stroked his beard and smiled. There are indeed talents in every generation. Lu Ye's 9th Order True Lake Realm cultivation was among them. The people who don't buy it don't count as 1TA2. Who doesn't know the methods that Lu Yi has shown? Who didn't know? Originally, the Holy Land didn't have much confidence in the Blood Race's encirclement because the limited information they received showed that the Blood Race's troops this time were far stronger than before. Moreover, there were many Blood Race masters hidden in the army, and there must be a lot of Saint Seeds among them. Obviously, the Blood Race also knew that as long as they broke through the Holy Land's outer defensive line, they would have a chance to remove this cancer from the Divine Gate Sea. For this reason, the Blood Race had put in a lot of effort. This caused the Jade Blood Holy Land's chances of winning to be very low. Before Lu Yi appeared, the seniors of the Holy Land were even divided into two factions. One of them wanted to bring the current human cultivators out of the Divine Gate Sea and find another place to settle down. However, this was too difficult, so it didn't happen. After all, this was the blood refining world and the Blood Race was in charge. Feng Wujiang was lucky to find the Divine Gate Sea and establish the Jade Blood Holy Land. There was no other Divine Gate Sea in this world that could provide the Jade Blood Holy Land with such favorable terrain. Chapter 1037. In the end, it was Feng Wujiang who decided to stay behind and guard the Jade Blood Sacred Land. It wasn't that they wanted to live and die with the Jade Blood Sacred Land, but if they ran away without even fighting, it would damage the reputation of these old seniors. Besides, even if the Blood Race really did have the power to attack the Jade Blood Sacred Land, they still had a good chance of fighting their way out. Just as the Holy Land was preparing for the war, Lu Yi arrived. He brought the Twin Qi Binding Formation Disc, which increased the Sacred Land's overall strength by 30%. Not to mention he also had the ability to control the sealed Blood Race Dao soldiers. Lu Yi had been busy these past few days and didn't have much interaction with the outside world. However, the old seniors of the 9 states had been secretly watching him. Now that they were in front of him, they naturally sized him up. "Everyone, let's act according to our previous arrangements," Feng Wujiang instructed. The old seniors didn't say anything else. They activated their spiritual power and flew out in all directions. Only Feng Wujiang, Meng Jie and Yu Ji stayed behind. "Senior brother, what do I need to do?" Lu Yi asked. Feng Wujiang said, "There are 11 islands around the sacred land that form a defensive line. This line of defense cannot be broken or the sacred land will be lost. Junior brother, I want you to stay on this island and work with Senior Meng Jie and Senior Yu Ji to protect this island." Lu Yi nodded. "No problem." After a pause he asked, "What are our chances of winning?" Feng Wujiang smiled. "Everything depends on effort. We'll know after we fight." He patted Lu Ye's shoulder and flew into the sky. He was probably going to do his final patrol. Lu Yi watched him leave, then turned to Meng Jie and Yu Ji. "I'll have to rely on you two seniors for this battle." Yu Ji smiled. "Meng Jie and I are only 2 people. You'll be the main defensive force in this battle. This is also why your senior brother arranged for you to stay here. But don't be too nervous. If any powerful blood race appears, Meng Jie and I will take care of them." Although the 2 old seniors had high cultivation levels, they were too few in number. Moreover, once powerhouses like them fought, they would definitely be targeted and entangled by the powerhouses of the Blood Clan. When that time came, the main defense force would be the Blood Clan's Dao soldiers under Lu Yi. Over 100 Divine Sea cultivators who could form a formation at any time. No one could underestimate such a force. "We have a 60% chance of winning." Yu Ji answered Lu Ye's previous question for Feng Wujiang. "But it's war. There are always accidents and changes, so we can't be too sure. We just have to do our best." Currently, the Holy Land only had a 60% chance of winning. One could only imagine how low the Holy Land's chances of winning had been before Lu Ye's arrival. It wasn't that the old seniors weren't powerful enough, it was just that there were too few of them. Although the Jade Blood Holy Land had experienced several decades of development and had an extremely large number of mortals, the number of cultivators they had was still quite small. Take the small island that Lu Yi needed to guard as an example. There were only 10 to 20,000 human cultivators here. The situation on the other islands was not much different. The total number of human cultivators was around 100,000, while the Blood Race army numbered in the millions. Even if the defending side had the geographical advantage, it would still be difficult to make up for the huge gap in numbers. This was a war with a great disparity in military strength. Yu Ji and Meng Jie were both conserving their strength for the upcoming battle. Lu Yi had Dao Shirshan watch over the Blood Race Dao soldiers while he patrolled the island's defenses alone. One had to admit that the logistics provided by the Kingdom of the 9 States were very good. Fierce and huge offensive weapons could be seen on every section of the city's walls. Each weapon was supported by a formation and had a different number of cultivators overseeing it. Moreover, Lu Yi keenly sensed that there were many formations set up in the city, including the twin Qi linking formation. He had provided the Holy Land with a large number of twin Qi linking formation discs. With these discs, any formation cultivator with a little bit of skill could easily set up a twin Qi linking formation. It could be said that the current city was truly armed to the extreme. Lu Yi felt a bit of pity. If he had enough fire spirit stones, he could provide the Holy Land with another weapon suitable for war. However, he had already used up all the fire spirit stones he had accumulated. The blood refining realm itself didn't produce any spirit stones, so there weren't many fire spirit stones in the Kingdom of the Nine States. It was useless to think about this now. The Holy Land had already done its best. Whether they won or lost the next battle, it was all fate. Lu Yi also began to conserve his energy. He didn't know when it started, but dark clouds covered the sky and surged over at an extremely fast speed. "They're here." Yu Ji's soft voice came from beside him. Lu Yi opened his eyes and looked over. At the end of his vision, dark clouds covered the sky. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the clouds. Below the clouds, there was an endless number of figures. They were either flying in the air or riding on spirit weapons. The Blood Clan didn't have much need for offensive spirit weapons. Not many Blood Clan members would use offensive spirit weapons. Their blood techniques were extremely corrosive to the spirituality of spirit weapons. However, this didn't mean that the Blood Clan didn't have flying spirit weapons. The small island that Lu Yi was in charge of guarding was located in the north of the Holy Land. In other words, he was facing the Blood Clan's northern front. It was led by Star Moon Saint. Back then, when hundreds of thousands of Blood Clan members gathered under the Star Moon Holy Land, he didn't feel much. Now that the army was pressing in, the pressure was indescribable. The Blood Clan's northern front crossed the Shenkai Sea and advanced. At the same time, Lu Yi couldn't see the armies advancing from the east, south and west. There was no cover on the sea. Moreover, it was impossible to cover up such a large-scale march. The Blood Clan didn't need to cover up anything. If it weren't for the Jade Blood Holy Land's battle record of repelling the Blood Clan several times, many people would have lost their minds. Compared to the pressure brought by the Blood Clan's army, Lu Yi was more concerned about another matter. He sensed traces of malice surging from all directions. It was as if a pair of invisible eyes were spying on him, wanting to do something unfavorable to him. The soaring dragon realm's origin in his body was stirring. This was a phenomenon that had never happened before. Lu Yi immediately understood that the invisible malice came from the will of heaven and earth of this world. The will of heaven and earth in this world was muddled and incomplete. It was not as strong and clear as the will of the 9 continents. Previously, Lu Yi could not sense it because the heaven secrets of the 9 continents had concealed it when he was sent here. Moreover, compared to the vast blood-refining world, a true lake-stage cultivator like him was not worthy of the will of heaven and earth's attention. Fairy Wood's miracle, however, the situation now was different. The Blood Clan's army was pressing in and enveloping the entire blood-refining realm. This made the world's will of this world much clearer. To the Blood Clan, the Jade Blood Holy Land was a malignant tumor. The blood-refining realm was the Blood Clan's world. The world's will of this world was naturally on the Blood Clan's side. However, that was all. Unlike the 9 provinces Tianji, who could directly interfere with the actions of cultivators, the world's will of the blood-refining realm didn't have this ability. It could only instinctively create momentum for the Blood Clan's army and create some psychological pressure on the human race. Just like the dark clouds that came with the Blood Clan's army. The reason why the Soaring Dragon Realm's origin was stirring was because the Blood Realm had destroyed the Soaring Dragon Realm. It was unknown what the relationship between the Blood Realm and the Blood Refining Realm was, but the Blood Clan lived in both realms. The Soaring Dragon Realm's origin naturally had some abnormal reaction to the world's will that seemed to be related to the world's destruction. The Blood Clan's army was pressing in. On the 11 small islands, the human race was waiting in formation. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. From afar, they could hear the earth-shattering battle cries from the Blood Clan's army. The dark clouds that covered the sky also quickly advanced with the Blood Clan's army until they covered the Jade Blood Holy Land and the surrounding islands. There was no longer any light in the sky. The whole world fell into darkness. The atmosphere was so oppressive that it made people feel as if there were more than 10 quilts on their bodies. With a roar, lines quickly lit up, piercing through the oppressive darkness and turning into the brightest light in the world. It was the human cultivators who were responsible for the formation on the city wall that activated the Great Formation. In an instant, an extremely complicated formation enveloped the entire city. In the city, all the human cultivators who were standing in it trembled. They had a strange feeling. They could clearly feel that they could inject their own power into the great formation under their feet and let anyone in the city borrow it. At the same time, they could also extract the power injected by others from the great formation under their feet. The twin chi-connected great formation was the first to be activated. 11 small islands and 11 twin chi-connected great formations lit up like 11 lanterns in the vast Jianghu Sea. Buzzing sounds continued. Following closely behind the twin chi-connected great formation, sections of the defensive formations on the city wall were activated. Crunching sounds could be heard. Yu Ji and Meng Jie, who were standing beside Lu Yi, turned to look at Lu Yi at the same time. With one glance, the two elders' eyes twitched. Yu Ji couldn't believe her eyes. "What are you eating?" Lu Yi handed over the half-eaten blood crystal to her. "Senior, have some." Even though Yu Ji was experienced and knowledgeable, she couldn't help but be deeply shocked. "You're fine eating this? I have a good appetite and digestion." Lu Yi smiled and swallowed the blood crystal. Her spiritual energy surged and continuously injected into the great formation under her feet, making it easier for the others in the great formation to borrow power. Yu Ji stiffly shifted her gaze away. She didn't intend to persuade her. Although Lu Yi looked old, she was still a true lake-stage cultivator. She didn't need to tell her what she could and couldn't eat. "Monster." The usually taciturn Meng Jie couldn't help but comment. He had been in the blood refinement world for so many years, but he had never seen a human who could eat blood crystals. Was she still human? He couldn't understand what kind of monsters had appeared in the 9 continents. Feng Wujiang might be ridiculously strong, but he was still within the range of a normal person. This junior martial brother of his was obviously abnormal. Suddenly there was a violent tremor. Following that, a beam of light shot out from the city wall. That beam of light was as straight as a sword and directly blasted into the vampiric army. Everywhere it passed, the vampiric army turned into powder. The war had begun. Chapter 1038. Following the first pillar of light, the spell formations on the 11 small islands were activated one after another. In an instant, streaks of light blotted out heaven and earth as they blasted toward the enemy. The blood tribe was instantly decimated, and broken limbs and blood rained down from the sky. This wasn't the first time that the blood tribe had fought against the Jade Blood Holy Land, so they were already well prepared. In the face of such an attack, the best way to deal with it was to spread out. Even so, they still suffered heavy casualties under the concentrated attacks of the humans. However, the blood tribe didn't hesitate in the slightest, and they continued to charge forward. In the eyes of these formations were powerful magic tools that were specially used to attack cities. Through the power amplification of the formations, the power of these magic tools was much greater than that of ordinary magic tools. It was almost comparable to the explosion of a spirit treasure, even though it might not be able to destroy the world with one strike. Looking down from the sky, the oval-shaped outer islands seemed to have become a glowing hedgehog. Those flickering spikes were the power of the spell formations on the islands. Many blood tribe cultivators were reduced to a rain of blood before they could even cry out in agony. Some blood tribe cultivators who were lucky enough to survive fell into the Divine Gate Sea, and they slowly fell silent amidst their anguished cries. The Divine Gate Sea was a natural barrier, and the blood in the sea of blood was like a pot of boiling oil to ordinary blood tribe cultivators. Falling into the sea of blood was basically a matter of life and death. This was also the main reason why Feng Wujiang had chosen to set up the Jade Blood Holy Land here. Without the natural barrier of the Divine Gate Sea, the Jade Blood Holy Land would have already been drowned by the sea of blood tribe cultivators, even with the presence of a dozen or so elders. No blood tribe cultivator was able to get within 3,000 feet of the islands, and they were all stopped at 3,000 feet away. The number of casualties continued to increase, but the blood tribe's army was endless. Lu Yi slowly came to a realization. The vanguard of the blood tribe wasn't very powerful, and most of them were at the Cloud River tier. No matter how many blood tribe cultivators there were, they obviously wouldn't be able to do anything. However, the blood tribe clearly didn't expect these Cloud River tier cultivators to be able to attack the islands. Their only value was to wear down the human army. In other words, they were cannon fodder. Only when the human army was exhausted to a certain extent would the true backbone of the blood tribe attack. This was what the vampires had done in every major battle in the past. Hence, even though the vampires numbered in the millions, more than half of them were used as cannon fodder. The vampires were also clear that the human side's greatest weakness was their numbers. At present, the humans had no blind spots, but as long as there was enough time, the human defense would gradually weaken. For this reason, the blood race had to pay a certain price. This was something that couldn't be helped. Fortunately, it was easy for vampires to grow, so even though they suffered great losses every time, they would make a comeback after a few years. After repeated battles, the vampires had gnawed away most of the islands on the periphery of the Jade Blood Holy Land. Now there were only 11 islands left to form a defensive line. This time, as long as they could tear a hole in this defensive line, they would have hope of destroying the Jade Blood Holy Land. Therefore, to the human race, the 11 defensive islands could not be lost. The fierce battle continued for a full 3 days and 3 nights. During this period of time, the vampires' attacks never stopped, and neither did the human islands counterattack. The 3,000-meter radius around the archipelago was the boundary between life and death. All vampires who stepped into this area died without exception. Even so, the vampires who came later still continued to advance. The vampires were undoubtedly a race that loved to fight. This was the insanity in their bones. The deaths of many of their people could not stop their determination to advance. Perhaps it was also related to the lack of corpses. All the dead vampires either turned into powder or fell into the Shinkei Sea. There was not a single corpse in sight. If the corpses were still around and piled up into a mountain, it might be able to deter the vampires to a certain extent. Unfortunately, this did not happen. On the northern battlefront, on a giant ship in the middle of the army, Saint Xingyu stood with his hands behind his back and watched quietly. He did not frown, nor did he feel any heartache. To him, those dead vampires were already done with their duty. There was no need to feel heartache. A divine ocean realm cultivator who was watching the battle from the front returned and reported, "Saint, 3 days have passed. Please give your orders." Saint Xingyu said, "Just act according to the plan." Yes. The divine ocean realm cultivator immediately retreated. At the same time, on the island's wall, Meng Jie, who had been silently watching the battle, also said, "3 days have passed." "Then let's act according to the plan," Yu Ji replied. Meng Jie slowly raised his hand and clenched it gently. Lu Yi looked at them in confusion. Yu Ji explained, "According to the rhythm of previous battles, 3 days is the time when the humans are at their weakest. After all, controlling the formation and the spirit tools in the formation eye for a long time was also a huge burden and consumption on the human cultivators. In previous battles, the first 3 days were a time point. After this point, the humans' defense would suddenly drop by a lot. And this change was the opportunity that the vampires had been waiting for. In these 3 days, the vampires suffered huge casualties, but the humans did not suffer any losses. After all the enemies were annihilated thousands of meters away. It was difficult for the humans to suffer any losses. Lu Yi immediately understood. Feigning weakness. If he hadn't brought the kindred spirit connecting formation disc to the humans of the Jade Blood Holy Land, this time point would indeed be the opportunity that the vampires had been waiting for. However, with the kindred spirit connecting formation disc, the situation was different. In these 3 days, the human cultivators in charge of controlling the fortifications had indeed consumed a lot of energy. However, they were constantly borrowing power through the kindred spirit connecting formation, so even though they had consumed a lot of energy, they were not at their weakest. Lu Yi had also eaten a large number of blood crystals in the past 3 days, and all the refined energy was injected into the formation. It wasn't just him. The hundreds of blood race Dao soldiers were also swallowing blood crystals, allowing the human cultivators to borrow their strength. One had to know that they were at the divine ocean realm and could provide a lot of help. Following Meng Jie's instructions, the counterattack on the island slowly decreased. They couldn't do it too obviously or the vampires would see through them. To the humans, such a trick could only be used once, so they naturally had to maximize the effect. This was not only the case on Lu Ye's island, but also on the other 10 islands. As time passed, the counterattack became weaker and weaker. If one were to look down from the sky, they would see that the spikes on the Jade Blood Holy Land had become much shorter and fewer. After observing for more than half a day and confirming that the human cultivators were weakened, the first counterattack of the vampires came. There were clearly many true Lake Realm vampires among the cannon fodder. They activated their own power and used the cannon fodder as cover to quickly attack the archipelago. The humans' counterattack was still there, but it was difficult to stop all the vampires' attacks. The 1,000-foot life and death line was constantly shrinking. 900 feet, 800 feet, 700 feet. In less than 4 hours, the vampires' front line had advanced to within 500 feet of the archipelago. The vampires could finally counterattack and they were no longer sitting ducks. Rays of bloody light shot out from the vampires' camp, and as far as the eye could see, the bloody light covered the sky and covered the archipelago. The formation buzzed and the defensive formation was activated, enveloping the archipelago. The bloody light landed on the defensive light barrier, causing specks of dark red to appear, as if they were sprinkling blood-red dye on the barrier. Sizzling sounds could be heard continuously, and the defensive formation's light quickly dimmed. The vampires' blood arts were too effective against defensive formations. One had to know that the formation on the archipelago was personally set up by a senior formation cultivator, his disciples and his disciples. Its defensive strength was not inferior to the defensive formations of the top sects in the 9 prefectures. Even so, the first layer of the defensive formation was broken in less than an hour. Although the vampires suffered many casualties during this period, the appearance of a large number of true Lake Realm vampires pushed the vampires' front line forward by another 300 feet. The second layer of the defensive formation was activated. In less than an hour it was broken again. The vampires' front line was now 300 feet away from the archipelago. The third layer of the defensive formation enveloped the archipelago. This was also the last defensive formation on the archipelago. If it was broken, the vampires' blood arts would be able to descend on the archipelago without restraint. When that happened, all the defensive structures would be destroyed in an extremely short period of time. Once such a situation occurred, the Jade Blood Holy Land would not be far from collapse with the current strength of the vampires. Among the vampires' army, there were already divine ocean realm cultivators. Although there were not many of them, the blood arts they used were not something that true Lake Realm or Cloud River Realm cultivators could compare to, and they were more corrosive to the defensive formation. 600 feet. This was an extremely dangerous distance. The vampires' army seemed to have seen the hope of victory, and they charged forward even more ferociously. FO compared to the vampires' momentum, the humans on the archipelago were clearly dispirited. The strength of their counterattack was sparse, and they were no longer as magnificent as before. In the instant that the last layer of the defensive formation was broken, the eyes of all the vampires lit up. Their speed suddenly increased, and as they ran, they rapidly prepared a series of exquisite secret techniques. Almost all of the vampires saw the destruction of the Jade Blood Holy Land and the removal of this malignant tumor. Many of them were even overjoyed. However, in the next instant their joy turned into shock. As the formation buzzed, an earth-shattering stream of light erupted from the walls of the small island and blasted into the vampires' army without restraint. In an instant, the porcupine that was the Jade Blood Holy Land shot out the spikes that had been retracted into its body. Many of the vampires still had expressions of joy on their faces, but their bodies were badly mutilated, and they fell into the godly watchtower sea, kicking up waves. In that instant, death swept through the vampires' camp like a hurricane. In that instant, countless vampires died on the spot. Even the divine ocean realm cultivators had fallen. All the vampires within 500 feet of the archipelago were wiped out in an extremely short period of time, and this distance was still expanding. Most of the vampires had no idea what was going on, and they disappeared as they ran. A few vampires saw that the situation was bad and hurriedly dodged. However, they could dodge once but they could not dodge twice or thrice. The corpses of the vampires fell like raindrops. Chapter 1039. On the northern battlefront ship, Saint Xingyu's expression changed for the first time. Impossible. The blood race had besieged the Jade Blood Holy Land many times. They were already familiar with the humans' rhythm in their battles. 3 days was the dividing line. It was the beginning of the humans' weakening defense. This had been proven many times in the past battles. However, why was it this time? No matter how indifferent he was to the death of the cannon fodder, his expression was slightly ferocious. The death of the cannon fodder was necessary and valuable. Their deaths would whittle away the human race's strength and pave the way for future generations to retaliate. But this sudden turn of events was something none of the vampires had expected. This time, tens of thousands of his blood race subordinates had died. Since when did the humans become so resilient? He placed his large hand on the ship's railing. He exerted so much force that the railing was crushed. In an instant, Saint Xingyu was caught in a dilemma. At this moment, there were only 2 paths before him. One was to order a retreat. However, if he did that, his efforts over the past 3 days would be in vain. It would be meaningless. The second path was to continue pressuring the humans. He was betting that the humans' counterattack would not last for long and that this was just a coincidence. If he was right, there would be hope for him to destroy the Jade Blood Holy Land. If he was wrong, not many of the hundreds of thousands of blood race troops he brought would survive. There was not much time for him to think on the battlefield. With a ferocious expression, he shouted, "Continue!" He chose the second path. Although he did not know why his previous intelligence was wrong, he firmly believed that the humans' counterattack would not last long. They had suffered great losses. If they were to retreat in defeat, it would not make sense. Most importantly, he did not feel sorry for the deaths of his soldiers. After the order was given, the Blood Race army continued pressuring the humans. As it turned out, he had made the right bet. In less than an hour, the humans' counterattack started to weaken. This was inevitable. Even though the great formation of chi and branches enveloped the small islands, allowing the cultivators who controlled the formations on the islands to continuously borrow power without worrying about their own consumption, they could still hold on. However, the formations set up on the city walls could not hold on any longer. 3 days of continuous activation had placed a huge burden on each of the formations. Coupled with the sudden outburst of wild herring just now, many of the formations had begun to slow down. Even though a large number of formation cultivators began to walk on top of the city walls and began to repair them, it was difficult to maintain the previous power. The pressure from the Blood Kindred army reappeared, and this time, it was even faster than before. That was because the proportion of powerhouses in the Blood Kindred army had increased. They were getting closer and closer. Although the humans had the geographical advantage of defending, once the Blood Race army got too close, the human powerhouses would have to act to intercept them. The vampires must not be allowed to set foot on the island. The 11 outer islands were the Jade Blood Holy Land's last line of defense, and none of them could be destroyed. The humans knew this, and so did the vampires. Once the vampires were allowed to land on the islands, the first thing they would do would not be to kill but to destroy the islands. As long as they could destroy any island, they could tear a hole in the defensive line of the humankind. The human race had to defend against the enemy. This was a choice they had no choice but to make. 2,000 feet was the maximum distance. Any closer and they would not be able to intercept him. If they intercepted him at this distance, the defenses of the islands at the rear would provide a certain degree of assistance. With that, Meng Jie removed a string of stones from his wrist. This string of stones looked ordinary, with only 7 or 8 multicolored stones strung on it. Lu Yi had noticed it before, but he didn't pay it much attention. He only thought it was a hobby of the old senior. But now it seemed that this was not the case. Meng Jie had removed the string of stones at this time, and it was obvious that he was about to make a move. He raised his other hand and plucked a stone bead from the string of stones. Although it was called a bead, it wasn't actually round. Instead, it was a small stone with an irregular shape. He weighed the small pebble in his hand and, like a naughty child, he threw it forward. In an instant, violent spiritual power and blood energy erupted. The invisible shockwave caused Lu Ye's clothes to flutter and his hair to fly backward. From what he could see, the sound waves behind the small stone rapidly expanded as it flew forward. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a huge stone that was as big as a house. Wherever the boulders passed, they forcibly blasted open a vacuum in the Blood Tribe army. Regardless of whether they were Cloud River Tier cannon fodder, True Lake Tier Blood Tribe cultivators, or Divine Sea Tier Blood Tribe cultivators, they all died upon contact with the boulders. Even the rivers of blood that the Blood Tribe cultivators had channeled were sliced in half, and cries of agony rang out from within the rivers of blood. Meng Jie used both hands and threw out stones one after another. In an instant, 7 or 8 vacuum zones with him as the source lay across the battlefield. The Blood Race's casualties were innumerable. Lu Ye's eyelids twitched. He was secretly horrified. He had seen Divine Sea Realm body cultivators before. Dao 13 was a Divine Sea Realm body cultivator, but Dao 13 didn't have such terrifying means as Meng Jie. That small stone was obviously not an ordinary stone. It was more like a strange treasure. He didn't know if Meng Jie had refined it himself or obtained it from somewhere. If he had refined it himself, he could refine it in the future. If he had obtained it from somewhere, then today's might could not be replicated. No matter what, this move alone had caused the Blood Race to suffer heavy losses. One of the large stones was obviously aimed at the ship behind them. However, too many Blood Race members were killed along the way, and it was obstructed by the blood rivers. By the time it reached the ship, it had lost half of its power. On the ship, a ray of bloody light burst forth. Like an arrow, it crashed into the stone and exploded into powder. More than 10 miles away, Star Moon Saint and Meng Jie's eyes met. The former's face was gloomy, while the latter's face was indifferent. "Take care of yourself," Meng Jie said without rhyme or reason. With a leap, he charged forward single-handedly. In an instant, his spiritual energy and qi and blood erupted, causing the void to tremble. Like a tiger in a flock of sheep, he brought death wherever he went. None of the blood race's experts could withstand a single blow from him. This was the powerful foundation of the old seniors from the 9 states. It could be said that Meng Jie had walked to the extreme on the path of body cultivation. It was just that he was limited by certain reasons and couldn't take that crucial step. Almost at the same time that Meng Jie charged out, many human race practitioners on the island city wall, who had been ready for a long time, also leaped out. They were in groups of 5 or 6 people, and there were also groups of 7 or 8 people. When they leaped out of the city wall, they didn't show any signs. However, when they leaped out, each of them activated their spiritual power and connected their qi. In an instant, their spiritual power gathered and formed different formations. Different formations had different forms of appearance. For example, the black tortoise moon-gazing formation formed a huge black tortoise that looked up at the moon. Several people in the formation stood on the black tortoise's 4 limbs, head, and back. Their spiritual power intertwined and merged, making the black tortoise look vivid and lifelike. Another example was the tiger roaring forest formation, which appeared to be a ferocious tiger that entered the mountain. When it opened its mouth to show its filial piety, the tiger's roar shook the sky. Another example was the fighting dragon sky formation, which appeared to be the shadow of a dragon that soared in the 9 heavens. The dragon's roar was loud and resounding, raising the morale. In the eyes of many blood race practitioners, the people who rushed out of the island were not the humans they were familiar with. They were like ancient vicious beasts that had broken free from their confinement. For a moment, they were dumbfounded and at a loss for what to do. The human race practitioners who had formed the formation didn't care about this. Using the power of the formation, they brazenly charged into the enemy group. In an instant, blood rained down. Lu Yi also charged out. His task this time was to cooperate with Meng Jie and Yu Ji to defend the island. He had been watching the show for several days, and now that it was finally time for him to contribute, he naturally wouldn't fall behind. The lineup on his side could be said to be luxurious. After several days of training, the hundreds of blood race Dao soldiers were already familiar with the changes in the various formations. Before the battle, Lu Yi had also made detailed arrangements, so at this moment, there was no need for him to give any orders. After the blood race Dao soldiers rushed out, they formed the formation according to the previous arrangement. Lu Ye's formation was the 9-temple array. In addition to him and Dao 13, there were 7 carefully selected blood race Dao soldiers, each of whom was at the 4th order divine sea realm. They plunged into a blood river that stretched across the sky. The underground blood river in the blood refining world was the foundation of the blood race. It was the hotbed for the birth of blood race blood fetuses, but the blood race could also condense their own blood river with the use of their blood techniques. Naturally, the blood river condensed in this way couldn't be compared to the real blood river, but it had many mysteries, especially when it came to trapping enemies. It was very effective. Back in Thousand Flowing Blessed Land, Dao 13 was trapped in a blood river and couldn't get out for a long time. That blood river was created by some true lake realm blood race cultivators. Of course, this was also related to Dao 13's low intelligence. If his intelligence was high enough, the blood river created by the true lake realm blood race cultivators wouldn't be able to trap him. Trapping enemies was only one aspect. The blood race cultivators hid in the blood river and were extremely difficult to find. The trapped enemy also had to be on guard against their attacks at all times. It could be said that they were extremely difficult to deal with. If Lu Yi was alone, he would never break into such a blood river. The blood river was the home ground of the blood race, so how could he play to his strengths and avoid his weaknesses? But if they were in a formation, especially with 7 blood race Dao soldiers in the formation, it didn't matter. The blood race Dao soldiers were also very familiar with the blood river. Although no one had taught them this before, the blood race was naturally proficient in all the secret techniques of their race. He led the Dao soldiers into a river of blood. Immediately, cries of shock and agony rang out. Then, corpses fell out of the river of blood and fell into the divine watchtower sea. The blood river's volume kept shrinking until it disappeared. Strictly speaking, the blood race's blood river could also be used as a formation because different blood race cultivators could fuse their blood rivers together to increase the volume of the blood river, making it easier for them to trap and kill enemies. The larger the volume of the fused blood river, the stronger the formation, but it didn't improve the blood race cultivators themselves. Chapter 1040. Therefore, this array unique to the blood race couldn't compare to the various arrays of the human race to a certain extent. Once the various arrays of the human race were activated, they would increase the strength of the people who formed them to varying degrees. After the first blood river was destroyed, Lu Yi Dao 13 and the other Dao soldiers appeared, surrounded by a large number of blood race cultivators. The sword gourd at Lu Ye's waist vibrated and streaks of sword light shot out, accompanied by miserable screams. In such a chaotic battlefield where enemies were everywhere, a true lake stage soldier cultivator would not be of much use, especially since the blood arts of the blood breeds had a strong corrosive effect on spiritual weapons. Among the saber arts he could use, only the crescent moon was suitable for such a battlefield. However, crescent moon consumed a lot of energy, so Lu Yi didn't use his saber and took out the sword gourd instead. There was a large amount of sword chi sealed inside the sword gourd, which was suitable for the current situation. Not all members of the blood race were able to conjure their own blood river. This was an ability that only members of the true lake stage possessed. Those of the cloud river stage were unable to do so. They could only conjure a blood fog to envelop themselves. While the sword chi in the sword gourd was raging, Lu Ye's divine sense surged and led his Dao soldiers into another blood river. The strength distribution of the human race cultivators in the Jade Blood Holy Land was actually quite awkward. There were a lot of top powerhouses, and dozens of old seniors could be said to be the mainstay of the Jade Blood Holy Land. There were also a lot of cultivators at the grassroots level. This was the case everywhere, and it was the same for the major sects of the 9 regions. However, there were very few orthodox masters, such as those between the 5th and 9th order Divine Sea realms. This couldn't be helped. The Jade Blood Holy Land had only been established for 30 years. Even though Feng Wujiang had migrated a large number of humans from the surrounding 100,000 kilometers of the Divine Gate Sea and had the support of the 9 states, and the old seniors had personally taught the human race cultivation, the time was too short. It was very difficult for the Holy Land's human race to reach the 5th order. This was also the biggest disadvantage of the human race in every battle with the blood race. It was true that the elders could slaughter the blood race army as they pleased, but the human race would always suffer a crushing defeat in a proper battle of experts. If it weren't for the elders holding them back, the human race would have been defeated a long time ago. The appearance of the twin chi-linked branches array disk smoothed out this gap to a great extent. Even if several human race cultivators at the 1st or 2nd order Divine Sea realm formed an array, they would still have the capital to contend with a 5th order Divine Sea realm enemy, and they would most likely have the upper hand. Lu Ye's vampiric Dao soldiers were all the more precious. Thus, his mission in this battle wasn't to kill the blood tribe cultivators at the Cloud River tier and True Lake tier. These enemies could be left to the humans of equal strength. He wanted to find blood tribe cultivators at the Spirit Ocean tier to kill. Only then would he be able to reduce the pressure on the humans. Of course, Lu Yi would not show mercy to those who could be easily eliminated. It was just a matter of convenience, so why not? Although the battlefield was chaotic, Lu Yi had his divine will. It was not difficult for him to find a blood race warrior of the Divine Sea realm. There were many Divine Sea realm warriors among the blood race. One Divine Sea realm blood race cultivator after another died under the 9 palace array. Lu Yi had never killed Divine Sea realm cultivators to his heart's content since he started cultivating. Of course, he also knew that this was not his own ability. This was the overall strength of the Dao soldiers and him. However, if one walked the road at night too often, they would eventually meet a ghost. His performance attracted the attention of many blood race cultivators, mainly because they did not understand why he had the help of their own race's masters. Dao soldiers had never appeared on the battlefield between the 2 races before. This time, the blood race suffered a great loss as soon as they were brought out. After killing the blood clan members in the Divine Sea realm in one of the rivers of blood and escaping, another river of blood came crashing down and enveloped him, Dao Shirsan, and the rest of the Dao soldiers. Then, with a flash of blood-red light, a figure seemed to float in front of him. Lu Yi instinctively pulled out his mountain coiling saber and slashed forward. A clanging sound rang out as a huge force swept over. Lu Yi felt his arm go numb and the blood in his chest tumble. If it were not for the help of the array, he would have been at a disadvantage. It was an 8th order Divine Sea realm blood race cultivator. Lu Yi instantly judged the other party's cultivation. Among the blood race cultivators he had killed before, the highest cultivation was only at the 6th order Divine Sea realm. It could be said that this was the strongest blood race cultivator he had encountered so far. It was not that there were no 9th order Divine Sea realm cultivators. There were hundreds of thousands of them in the blood race army, and Ninth Order Divine Sea Realm cultivators were everywhere. However, the top Divine Sea Realm cultivators were currently besieging the human race's old seniors. Every blood race cultivator had their own battlefield. With the Dao soldiers around him, Lu Yi could clearly see the enemy's position. He had done this before when he killed the enemy. The only ones who knew the details of the blood river were always the blood race cultivators themselves. As long as he could find the location of the main body of a blood race cultivator, killing the enemy was not difficult. However, the situation was different this time. The enemy's cultivation was too high and his movements were too fast. Although Lu Yi could clearly see his position, it was useless if he could not keep up with his speed. With a thought, Lu Yi urged the power of his talent tree. Before the battle, he had considered how to deal with such a master. Borrowing the power of his talent tree was undoubtedly the best way. Roots invisible to the naked eye stretched out and plunged into the blood river, devouring it. Lu Yi could even devour the power of the real blood river, let alone the secret technique of a blood race cultivator. Moreover, the blood river that the blood race cultivators used didn't appear out of thin air. It was a manifestation of their strength, and the energy contained in it was extremely rich. As such, Lu Yi urging his talent tree to devour the blood river was equivalent to devouring the heritage of the blood race master. With the 9-palace chain array, this 8th order Divine Sea Realm blood race cultivator couldn't do anything to Lu Yi for the time being. Although Lu Yi couldn't do anything to him, it was impossible for them to remain in this stalemate forever. When the time came, it would be the blood race who would suffer. As time passed, the blood river would collapse on its own, and the blood race cultivator's strength would be damaged. The changes in the blood river naturally couldn't be hidden from the blood race cultivator. After all, it was a manifestation of his strength. The moment he realized something was wrong, he cried out, "What are you?" It had always been the blood race who devoured the blood of the human race, but he never thought that one day he would see a human devouring a blood race cultivator. 2K While he was still in shock, he saw Lu Yi biting a blood crystal in his mouth. With a grunt, he crushed it. After such a long battle, he had consumed a lot of his spirit chi, so he took this opportunity to replenish it. But when the blood race cultivator saw this scene, he couldn't help but be shocked. Feeling the power of the blood river rapidly weakening, he didn't dare to continue maintaining the secret technique. He immediately rolled up his body and allowed the blood river to quickly merge into his body. Lu Yi saw the light of day and the flying wing spirit crests on his back unfolded. With the support of wind travel, he rushed towards the Spirit Sea Realm blood race cultivator like a bolt of lightning. Dao 13 and the other blood race Dao soldiers followed like shadows, instantly engulfing the enemy. Holding the mountain coiling saber in front of him, Lu Yi thrust it forward, causing specks of starlight to flicker. Tyrannical first form Starry Sky. Facing this attack, the blood race cultivator wasn't afraid. With his 8th order Divine Sea Realm cultivation, he had the capital to be fearless. Sending his divine sense towards Lu Yi, he stretched out his hand and stabbed towards Lu Yi's chest with his sharp fingernails. If this attack connected, Lu Yi might not be able to survive even with the protection of the Scarlet Dragon battle robe. But at this moment, the spirit chi around the blood race cultivator suddenly became chaotic and a petal appeared out of thin air. The petal was huge, and under the blood race cultivator's stunned gaze, it wrapped him tightly in an instant. The blood race cultivator's sharp fingernails stopped at Lu Yi's chest, but Lu Yi's saber had already descended. Blood splattered as the blood race cultivator's body stiffened. At the same time, Dao 13 punched out with his fists, and the other blood race Dao soldiers also clawed out. In a one-on-one fight, no one was his opponent, but under the cover of this array, who would dare to fight him one-on-one? This was a group attack tactic. Lu Yi put away his saber and rushed towards the direction of another Spirit Sea Realm blood race cultivator. The 8th order blood race cultivator behind him had already turned into a pile of minced meat. He didn't even have time to dig out his blood crystal. 2,000 meters away on the city wall, Yuji smiled slightly and withdrew her slender jade finger, her spirit chi slowly calming down. On the Blue Blood Holy Land side, there were about 70 seniors from the 9 states who were still alive. On average, each island could be guarded by 6 or 7 people. However, the island where Lu Yi was located only had Meng Jie and Yuji. The reason for this arrangement was because of the blood race Dao soldiers that Lu Yi had trained. With over 100 blood race Dao soldiers, there was no need for too many seniors. Meng Jie had already killed his way out, and Lu Yi and the Dao soldiers followed closely behind, but Yuji was still here. Naturally, she wasn't just here to watch the show. As the top Dharma cultivator from the 9 states, even if she just stood here, the blood race cultivators she targeted wouldn't have a good ending. However, because she had to be on guard, she couldn't take action often. She could still lend Lu Yi a hand at a critical moment. The petal that wrapped around the blood race cultivator just now was her work. She might not have a good way to deal with the blood race cultivator hiding in the blood river, but since he revealed himself, he was a target for her. The battlefield was chaotic, and Lu Yi could feel streaks of earth-shattering auras colliding continuously. Those were the seniors from the 9 states displaying their might. Almost every senior was surrounded by a large number of blood race cultivators at the divine ocean realm. They weren't afraid of death, and they used their bodies and lives to restrain these seniors. There were also solo fights, and those were the blood race's saint seeds. Although the seniors were powerful, the saint seeds weren't ordinary either. Almost every saint seed had the power to match those seniors. Lu Yi previously thought that he was the only saint seed on the Star Moon Saint side. Now he knew that he was wrong. The Star Moon Saint wasn't the only saint seed on the northern battlefront. There were at least 5 of them. Previously they had concealed themselves and Lu Yi couldn't sense them. Now that they had revealed themselves, their powerful might was obvious. The blood race army's attack never stopped. The humans had some concerns, and they could only maintain the battlefront a few hundred feet away from the island. They couldn't advance because they couldn't receive support from the rear, and they couldn't retreat because the blood race would break through the defensive line. This area of a few hundred feet had become a forbidden zone for life. The blood race suffered heavy casualties, and the humans also suffered heavy casualties. This was the case for this battle, and it was the same for all the previous battles. Chapter 1041. On the chaotic battlefield, Lu Yi felt like he was surrounded by enemies from all directions. This was one of the advantages of not having to worry about accidentally injuring his own people, but the downside was that he was constantly fighting with others, and there was no time for him to rest. Fortunately, it was easy for him to replenish his own energy, but it wasn't so convenient for other human cultivators. If this went on, the human race would definitely be weakened. Of course, it was the same for the blood race. The blood race's situation was more serious because they didn't have support from the rear. On the human race's side, the array formation on the small island never stopped providing support. Although it wasn't as dense as before, it still continued to work and killed many blood race cultivators. At this point, the battle had become a competition of tenacity between both sides. The blood race's million-strong army came aggressively. They originally wanted to take down the Jade Blood Sacred Ground in one fell swoop. They had the capital and confidence to do so. If it was the Sacred Ground 2 months ago, the probability of stopping the blood race's attack was less than 30%. However, with the popularization of the Twin Chi and Branch Formation and the Twin Chi and Branch Formation that was set up on the small islands, it became the greatest help for the human race. This infuriated many blood race experts. Lu Yi wasn't sure about the situation on the other small islands because the battlefield was too vast and chaotic. With his pitiful divine thought, he couldn't detect too far away. However, based on the current situation, the small island he was in charge of had a good defense. He didn't need to care about the situation on the other small islands. Each small island had a few seniors in charge, and they would only do better than him. Just as Lu Yi was thinking about this, he suddenly felt a great sense of danger. An invisible terror lingered in his heart, and then a great pressure came from afar. He looked up and saw a bloody light rushing toward him. That bloody light shuttled nimbly on the battlefield and was 3 miles away in the blink of an eye. Star Moon Holy Venerable. Lu Yi knew who was targeting him. Since the beginning of the battle, Star Moon Holy Venerable had been holding down the fort at the back and hadn't intervened. However, he had no choice but to take action now. What Lu Yi didn't expect was that this guy would target him first. Was it the existence of the blood race's Dao soldiers that attracted his attention? There was a possibility. This was the first time Dao soldiers had appeared on the battlefield of the war between the two races. Moreover, the other blood race Dao soldiers all had their own formations. Only his side had 2 more human figures. This was a little eye-catching. The Star Moon Holy Sovereign probably wanted to understand the profoundness of the Dao weapon. Hence he came to look for Shao Qin directly. However, Lu Yi did not panic in the slightest. He did not even have any intention of retreating. This was because he knew that someone was watching the holy venerables of the blood race. It would have been fine if Xingyue had not made a move. However, since she had made a move, it was not up to him to make a move. With his small arms and legs, killing some blood breeds at the divine ocean realm was the right thing to do. As expected, a sonorous sword hum rang out, and a beam of sword light pierced out diagonally toward the Star Moon Saint, stopping him 3 lis away. Then a great battle broke out. Violent repercussions swept out, and the entire Divine Watchtower sea seemed to be seething. The two figures entangled with each other and spun into the air like a top, quickly leaving the main battlefield. Lu Yi looked up and could vaguely see Jianghu Hong's figure in the sword light. High up in the sky, there were many small battlefields that had been set up individually. Those were the places where the Holy Seeds and the old seniors fought. The repercussions of their battle were too terrifying. Only by staying far away from the main battlefield could they avoid being swept in by the cultivators of the two races. The blood race's holy venerables would definitely not consider this. To them it did not matter how many blood breeds died. If the blood race's death could drag a human cultivator down with them, it would be worth it. However, since they were going against the old seniors, the choice of the battlefield was not up to them. The old seniors from the 9 states naturally had the means to shift the battlefield away. Lu Yi retreat. At this moment, a gentle voice rang in Lu Ye's ears. Without any hesitation he led his 8 Dao soldiers and retreated to the back. He landed on the wall of the small island, but there was no trace of Yuji nearby. Lu Yi frowned. He knew that something was wrong. Yuji was this small island's strongest defense. She had to stay here all the time to prevent the blood race's strong cultivators from taking advantage of her. However, she had disappeared at this moment. Clearly, something unexpected had happened. Before she disappeared, she sent a voice transmission to Lu Yi, asking him to retreat and take over her position. Under normal circumstances, Lu Yi did not have this ability. However, if he formed a formation with the Dao soldiers, he could barely do it for a while. Looking around, he still could not see Yuji's figure. Lu Yi immediately cast his gaze into the blood sea. There was no reason for such a big living person to disappear into thin air, let alone a strong cultivator like Yuji. Since she was not in his field of vision, there was only one place left. Yuji had entered deep into the blood sea. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi cast his gaze into the blood sea, a huge bubble surged out from the depths of the blood sea, mixed with violent spiritual energy fluctuations. The small island buzzed and trembled as if there was an earthquake. Yuji was fighting with someone. And the only thing that could fight with her was the holy seed. A holy seed had secretly dived into the blood sea. In the blood refinement realm, the blood race's feelings toward the blood sea were very complicated. Before they reached adulthood, they absorbed nutrients from the blood sea to grow stronger. However, after they reached adulthood, the blood sea was a forbidden land that they could not easily touch. No one knew why this was so. They had spent countless years like this. However, the blood race had the chance to enter deep into the blood sea to cleanse their bloodline and become stronger. Of course, the risk was extremely high. Back then, Zhang Julai wanted to enter deep into the blood sea to cleanse his bloodline so that he could continue to serve Lu Yi. In the end, he failed as expected. But to the holy seeds, the blood sea was a place that they could go as they pleased. They would even cultivate in the blood sea, maintaining a rapid pace of growth until their cultivation reached the peak, unable to advance any further. The Jade Blood Sacred Land used the vast Shinkai Sea as a barrier. Although this gave countless ordinary blood race a headache, there was also a drawback. That was, the holy seeds could use the cover of the blood sea to approach them silently. In the past, the destruction of the outer islands was basically related to this. In this regard, the old seniors of the human race were naturally on guard. This was also the reason why every small island had an old senior overseeing it. It was to prevent such a thing from happening. Now Yuji was fighting with the holy seed under the blood sea. Lu Yi did not know who was stronger and who was weaker. He only knew that if Yuji did not quickly think of a way to move the battlefield away, this small island would not be able to hold on. The island trembled incessantly. Lu Yi could not even stand steadily. Large amounts of cracks began to appear on the city walls, looking as if it would collapse at any moment. Fortunately, Yuji did not disappoint Lu Yi. After about 10 breaths of time, the blood sea's waves rolled, and 2 figures emerged one after the other. One of them was Yuji. It was unknown what kind of miraculous technique she used, but the holy seed had no choice but to obediently follow behind her. In the blink of an eye, they became 2 dots of light in the sky. The island's trembling did not stop. Under the sea, powerful energy fluctuations were undulating. Another figure arrived in a flash. With a serious expression, he directly jumped into the blood sea. Lu Yi did not recognize this old senior, but he was obviously from the 9 states. Soon, this old senior rushed out of the blood sea, but there was no sign of the holy seed. Lu Yi was puzzled. He originally thought that there was another holy seed causing trouble under the sea, but it did not seem to be the case. Sensing Lu Ye's gaze, this old senior looked up and sighed. "We can't keep it." Lu Yi immediately understood that the holy seed had left some special means under the sea. Yu Ji might not have discovered it, but it was more likely that she had discovered it but could not do anything about it. Demon-suppressing museum, the only thing she could do was take the holy seed away. The island's trembling became more and more intense. The city's walls continued to collapse, and the earth began to crack open. Blood poured in. Amidst cries of alarm, many human cultivators on the island rose into the air. In a short while the island sank more than 30 meters, and it looked like it would be submerged by the blood-red sea. Without the support of the defensive fortifications on the island behind them, the human cultivators on the battlefield were instantly in a dire situation. Originally, with the support from the rear, the human side could not be said to have a great advantage, but there was no problem in maintaining the situation. However, the island had sunk and the defenses had all been destroyed. Without the support from the rear, the pressure on the front suddenly increased. There was still an endless stream of vampires joining the battlefield, and there was no end to it. Beside Lu Yi, that old senior had already turned into a streak of light and charged into the enemy group. At the same time he issued an order. Retreat. The human race's strength was limited, and they could not waste their forces on this kind of entanglement. With that order, the human cultivators retreated as they fought, and soon they had retreated to the island's original location. More and more cultivators gathered, and almost all of them were injured, but their eyes were incomparably resolute. They each formed a formation and stood in the air. The island was gone, but they were still there. Flesh and blood were also a line of defense. The vampires under Lu Ye's command also charged back. Of the 100 or so vampires, they had lost 20 or so, and only 70 or so survived. It was clear to see how intense the battle was. The human cultivators retreated, but the battle was still fierce. The old senior was surrounded by a large number of vampires, and his figure could no longer be seen in the distance. Suddenly, a ray of light bloomed, and then it became as bright as day. Under the cover of the light, the unpredictable vampires transformed into vampires. The 5 old seniors' figures were revealed, and spiritual energy surged around their bodies. There were no survivors within 100 meters of them. However, after a moment of silence, vampires from all directions continued to charge toward him. There were even vampires swarming toward Lu Yi and the others, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. A gap had been torn in the outer defense line of the Jade Blood Holy Land. This was an opportunity for the vampires, and they naturally would not let it go. Looking at the swarm of vampires, Lu Ye's divine sense surged, and he issued an order to all the vampires. In the next moment, the blood energy around the 70-odd Divine Sea Realm vampires surged and gathered, forming a huge river of blood. Chapter 1042. A gigantic river of blood suddenly appeared in the sky above the small island. It could no longer be called a river of blood, but a sea of blood. Of course, it paled in comparison to the real sea of blood beneath their feet, but it still formed a majestic line of defense. After all, this was the gathering of more than 70 divine ocean realm blood tribe cultivators' blood Dao secret technique. Coupled with the help of the twin chi binding formation disc, the sea of blood's aura was uniform and displayed great power. The sea of blood surged and wriggled as if it was alive. The blood tribe army was approaching, and the blood tribe's secret techniques blasted into it, creating layers of ripples. Beside the sea of blood in midair, there were many human cultivators who had lost their foothold. They used all kinds of methods to fight against the blood tribe. For a moment, streams of light intersected and the scene was chaotic. However, there were fewer humans and it was easy for them to be at a disadvantage in such a battle. In a short while, they were suppressed to the point that they almost couldn't fight back and many of them died. At this moment, the sea of blood wriggled and expanded, enveloping all the humans. After losing sight of the human cultivators, the blood tribe charged into the sea of blood. In an instant, spiritual power surged inside the sea of blood. In the sea of blood, Lu Yi and the Dao soldiers formed a formation. Their auras were closely connected as they swam in this chaotic environment. Everywhere they passed, a bloody storm was set off. The blood sea was formed by more than 70 Dao soldiers of the blood race using a secret technique. This was their home ground and they were under Lu Ye's command. How could the blood race army have a good ending if they plunged into this place? Lu Yi just kept slashing with his saber and almost every slash was effective. He didn't need to deliberately find a target at all. The Blood Tribe Dao soldiers would guide him and even send the Blood Tribe members who had fallen into the sea of blood to him. The many human cultivators also received the same treatment. It could be said that in this vast sea of blood, each of them had an invisible helper by their side to help them kill the enemy and avoid risks. The Blood Tribe suffered continuous casualties, and the blood of the dead Blood Tribe expanded the scale of the sea of blood. From the outside, the huge sea of blood was wriggling and changing like a rapidly growing monster. There was still an endless stream of Blood Tribe members rushing into the sea of blood. There were also Blood Tribe members who wanted to cross the sea of blood and kill their way in from the sky. However, the sea of blood seemed to have eyes. From time to time, blood-colored whips would split from the sea of blood and sweep these Blood Tribe cultivators who tried to cross into the sea of blood. All Blood Tribe members who were swept into the sea of blood were either killed or injured. For a time, no Blood Tribe members were able to break through the sea of blood. Some people from the small islands on the left and right also came to help. Everyone knew that they couldn't let the vampires break through here. Otherwise, the mortals on the island would suffer heavy casualties. Although a hole had been torn in the defensive line, it was now replaced by the Blood Race Dao soldiers' secret techniques. Instead, it became more flexible. This was an opportunity for the human race. Lu Yi no longer bothered to find his target. He stood together with Dao Shisan while chewing blood crystals to replenish his energy. The mountain saber in his hand was ready to strike at any blood who dared to appear in front of him. The master and servant would greet them with a saber and a fist. Basically, no Blood Tribe member could stop them. It wasn't that no Divine Sea Realm Blood Race cultivators had entered this place, but those Blood Race cultivators could only fight on their own. How could they compete with this huge blood sea? In this blood sea, any Blood Race cultivator who entered would be greatly suppressed. Even a 7th-order Divine Sea Realm Blood Race cultivator would only be able to display the strength of a 4th or 5th-order cultivator. The killing never stopped since the beginning. Every moment, there would be movements of Blood Tribe members around him. They were either humans or Blood Tribe members. Lu Yi didn't even know which side had the upper hand in the current situation. In such a large-scale battle, the strength of an individual was too small. He could only do what he had to do. Kill the enemy. Kill as many enemies as possible. He believed that everyone else was doing the same. Time passed by very slowly. Lu Yi didn't know how many Blood Tribe members he had killed. At first, enemies were constantly sent to him, but gradually the frequency decreased. In the end, Lu Yi stood in place and waited for the Blood Tribe members to arrive. He had to take the initiative to attack, but his gains were few. He didn't know why this happened. Maybe it was because most of the Blood Tribe members had been killed. Great God Momo's Human Race Great Saint. Translator, Cetalan Editor, Cetalan Vampires Leave to Read for Free, _ the fastest to update the latest chapter. Perhaps the Blood Race had broken through the defensive line of the Blood Sea and attacked the Jade Blood Holy Land. He hoped it was the former. Until a certain moment, a gentle voice suddenly entered their ears from an unknown direction. Come out, all of you. The vampires have retreated. Lu Yi stared blankly for a moment, then flew up into the air with Dao Shisan. A moment later they were out of the range of the Sea of Blood. As far as the eye could see, there were no longer any blood breeds around the archipelago. Only the bloody light of the blood breeds could be seen further away. Deafening cheers could be heard coming from all around. The surviving human cultivators were celebrating and venting their frustrations. Lu Yi gasped for breath, his face as pale as a sheet of paper, and his boiling murderous intent was difficult to calm down. Are you okay? Yu Ji asked with concern. Lu Yi shook his head blankly. Suddenly he looked down at the blood sea below. This was the blood sea formed by more than 70 Blood Race Dao soldiers under his command using a secret technique. However, the current state of the blood sea was clearly not right. Its scale was more than 5 times larger than before. Moreover, it was wriggling violently, sometimes expanding and sometimes contracting. It looked extremely unstable. Lu Ye's divine will surged as he ordered all the Dao soldiers to dispel the secret technique. However, it was useless. The blood sea wriggled even more violently. One could vaguely see that it wanted to split apart but was unable to do so. This was the strangeness of the Blood Clan's secret technique. Although the Blood Clan's blood rivers could be compatible with each other and work together to defend against the enemy, they couldn't be maintained for too long. Otherwise, there would be a situation where it was difficult to split apart. This was because if too much time passed, the blood rivers of different blood clans would truly merge together. Especially this time, there were more than 70 Blood Race Dao soldiers fusing together. Moreover, they had even used the branches of kindred spirit, which made the fusion even more thorough. No matter how powerful one was, one had to pay a price. This blood sea became the defensive line after the small island was destroyed. It created a great geographical advantage and helped the human race resist the attack of the blood race army. However, the price was that they could no longer be separated. The figures of human cultivators followed closely behind Lu Yi as they surged out of the blood sea. All of them were in a sorry state and were injured. There were even some who were missing arms and legs. The cruelty of a large-scale battle was displayed in front of Lu Yi for the first time. There were not many human cultivators who survived, less than 30% of the initial number. It could be foreseen that if the blood race's attack was even more ferocious, this side might not be able to defend. At that time, the blood race army would be able to invade through the gap here. The consequences would be unimaginable. The blood sea wriggled even more violently. Waves of panic were transmitted from the blood sea. It was the struggle of the blood race Dao soldiers. Lu Yi sighed. He raised his hand and slowly pressed down, sending a final order to the Dao soldiers. The struggle stopped. The huge blood sea slowly sank down as Lu Yi pressed down with his hand. In the end, it fell into the real blood sea. The waves surged and the two merged into one, no longer distinguishable from each other. The greatest contributor to this battle didn't have a good ending. Even though they were all blood race, Lu Yi still couldn't help but sigh. A figure descended from the sky and landed in front of Lu Yi. It was Feng Wujiang. He looked at Lu Yi with a shocked expression. "Junior brother, are you okay?" "Yes. I'm fine." Lu Yi shook his head. This shake was fine, but it instantly made him feel like the world was spinning. He couldn't help but stagger. He reached out and grabbed Dao Shisan's arm. "I feel a little dizzy." "Yes." Ring, the crisp sound of a bell rang out. A slender finger touched Lu Ye's forehead. Yuji's voice sounded. "If you're tired, rest well?" "Yes." Her voice was soft as if she was whispering in her sleep. Lu Yi glanced at her and finally closed his eyes, falling asleep instantly. Dao Shisan grabbed him by the collar to prevent him from falling. "I've used up too much energy." Yuji looked at Feng Wujiang. In this battle, Lu Yi had been constantly replenishing his energy. The consumption of his spiritual power and soul power was unprecedented. Ordinary cultivators would constantly use up their energy in battle, and the power they could unleash was what their body could bear. But Lu Yi was different because he replenished his energy. I'll provide you with the latest chapter of Great God Momo's The Great Sage of Human Tao. Chapter 1042, Battle Vampires Leave to Read for Free, Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The consumption of energy was very simple, so he maintained the highest level of power from beginning to end. When he was focused on killing the enemy, he didn't notice anything. But once the battle ended, his tense nerves relaxed, and the tiredness surged up like a tidal wave. He couldn't take it anymore. Feng Wujiang scanned with his spiritual will and knew Lu Ye's current situation. His life wasn't in danger. He just needed to rest for a while. "Send him back. Ask Granny Jiao to heal him." "Yes." Yuji nodded. "Of course." "Yes." It was all thanks to Lu Ye's vampiric Dao soldiers that they were able to defend the gap in the defense line. Although it wasn't Lu Ye's credit, the dazzling performance of the kindred in this battle couldn't be concealed. Judging from the vampire's strength and formation in this battle, the Jade Blood Sacred Land would have been hard-pressed to protect if it hadn't been for the Twin Spirit Disc. At that time, the elders could only lead a group of people to fight their way out. The sacred land would have been destroyed, the human race would have been slaughtered, and decades of hard work would have turned to dust. Wave after wave of cheers continued unabated. They were celebrating for defeating the vampires again today. Feng Wujiang sighed amidst the waves of cheers. They could defeat the vampires this time and protect the Jade Blood Sacred Land, but what about next time? The human race had indeed won this battle, but they had also lost. One of the 11 islands around the Sacred Island had been destroyed, opening a gap in the defense line. If there was a next time, the vampires would definitely concentrate their forces in this direction. At that time, the human race would be hard-pressed to defend. As the master of the Sacred Land, Feng Wujiang had to look further. He couldn't help but worry. One had to know that the vampires grew very quickly. Even if they suffered heavy losses this time, it wouldn't take long for them to recover and stage a comeback. The human race, on the other hand, didn't have such an advantage. To see the latest update of The Great Sage of Human Tao, please enter in your browser. Providing you with the latest update of The Great Sage of Human Tao, Momo. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Vampires Retreat Free Reading. Chapter 1043. Pa 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 sounds kept ringing out. Lu Yi woke up from his deep sleep and immediately sensed that something was wrong. He was actually lying on a bed and someone was frantically patting his back. Just as he was about to move, a voice sounded in his ear. "Dao friend, you've been in a long battle and your flesh is torn. Don't act rashly for now." Lu Yi tilted his head to look, only to see a white-robed youth smiling warmly at him. From the spiritual energy waves emanating from his body, he was evidently at the true lake stage. Furthermore, his spiritual energy was of the wood attribute. With each strike, a gentle energy was imprinted into his body, mending his torn flesh. Lu Yi felt his entire body aching, especially his right arm. He felt like he couldn't muster any strength. He immediately understood that the young man was right. His previous battle had lasted for too long, and he had been maintaining his strongest state. This had caused his flesh and blood to be damaged. This youth was obviously healing his wounds. Medical cultivator? Lu Yi asked. Dao friend's eyes are sharp. I am indeed a medical cultivator. The youth smiled in response, but his hands didn't stop moving. Thank you. Lu Yi enjoyed the treatment with a clear conscience. Although he would be more satisfied if it was a female cultivator doing this, since the other party was healing his wounds, he naturally couldn't say anything. Lu Yi wasn't a talkative person, but the young medical cultivator had a lively personality. As he healed Lu Yi, he said, I heard from Granny that in this battle, Dao friend made a great contribution and killed countless enemies. It's truly admirable. The Granny he was talking about was probably Granny Jiu. Regardless of whether it was in the 9 regions or here, under normal circumstances, medical cultivators would not participate in killing. Their skills were all focused on treating people. Therefore, although they had some means to protect themselves, their real fighting strength was generally not that good. Of course, some poison doctors were an exception. Their true fighting strength wasn't that great either, but their killing methods were more subtle and invisible, making it impossible to guard against. Every profession has its specialization. Medical cultivators have their own things. I'm a weapon cultivator, so I should kill enemies. What you and I do is our job. There's no difference between us. The youth immediately had a good impression of Lu Yi. As he healed Lu Yi, he casually chatted with him. After an hour, the young man finished and said, I see that fellow Taoist has a strong physique. This kind of injury isn't a big deal. Rest well for a few days and you'll be fine. Lu Yi got up from the bed and stretched his body. He felt that the soreness had lessened a lot, and his whole body felt comfortable. Junior brother's skills are not bad. The young man smiled and said, Senior brother, if you have any instructions in the future, just give me a shout. I'm at the medical center in the city. Senior brother, please rest first. I'll take my leave first. Lu Yi walked him to the door, then turned around and walked back. He glanced at Dao Shisan and saw that his breathing was normal. He knew that the previous battle had not affected him much. This was the advantage of body cultivators. Even if he had suffered some minor injuries, he would be fully recovered in a few days. How long have I been asleep? Lu Yi asked. Dao 13 thought for a moment, then slowly raised his middle finger at him. Only 1 day? Lu Yi was slightly surprised. He had slept very soundly, mainly due to the exhaustion from the battle. In addition, this was his eldest senior brother's territory, so there was no need for him to be on guard. He sat cross-legged on the bed, closed his eyes and examined his body. The injuries on his physical body were nothing. His recovery ability was not bad, and with the help of a medical cultivator, he could easily recover. However, Lu Yi quickly noticed that something was wrong. His deity's lake seemed to have expanded a little. This was a pleasant surprise. The problem of the deity's lake had troubled him for a long time. This thing was born by chance when he was in the First Order True Lake Realm. In the history of the 9 continents, there had never been a true Lake Realm cultivator who had given birth to a soul body, so there was no precedent for this. However, Lu Yi had not encountered anything wrong so far. The birth of his divine sense gave him a stronger perception, and he could even activate and construct divine crests. It could be said that there were many benefits. However, his deity's lake was still different from a real deity sea. It could only be considered a weakened version of the deity sea. Lu Yi had naively thought that as his cultivation increased, his deity's lake would slowly expand, and eventually evolve into a real deity sea. However, after such a long time, the growth of the deity's lake was extremely limited. Basically, Every time he drank the soul-cleansing water, the deity's lake would have a slight change. This led to his divine sense not being strong. Even the blood race heavenly venerable who had just reached the deity sea had a stronger divine sense than him. This was also a problem that had troubled Lu Yi. However, because he was still in the true lake realm, he did not waste too much energy on this. Unexpectedly, there was a pleasant surprise today. The deity's lake had inexplicably expanded a little. Although it was not much, the change was obvious. The strength of his divine sense was also stronger than before. Was it because he was already in the ninth order true lake realm? Lu Yi was not sure. When a cultivator's cultivation reached his level, they would usually be preparing to break through to the deity sea. However, this was a huge hurdle for any cultivator. If they could cross it, they would be able to see the world, but if they could not, they would be trapped in the true lake realm for the rest of their lives. King Gengwu had been trapped in the ninth order true lake realm for many years. It was not that he did not have enough aptitude, but that breaking through to the deity sea realm did not depend on one's aptitude. A large part of it was also luck. Of course, the supply of resources was indispensable. If one could obtain treasures that nourished the soul, such as soul-cleansing water, it would be easier to break through to the deity sea realm. What Lu Yi did not understand was why the deity's lake had expanded so much this time. Zhong, after some investigation, he still could not figure out the reason. However, it was indeed time for him to break through to the deity sea realm. This kind of thing could not be done behind closed doors. He had to find someone to ask for advice. In cultivation, there were some things that one needed to persevere on, but there were also some things that one needed to communicate with others. Originally, Lu Yi wanted to find his eldest senior brother to ask about the situation. However, the battle had just ended, and the Jade Blood Holy Land had many trivial matters to attend to. Lu Yi could not find any trace of his eldest senior brother, so he could only wait for a while. For the time being, he could not study the deity's lake. Lu Yi could only comprehend what he had gained from this battle. In this battle, he had maintained the highest level of strength from beginning to end. This was because many of the enemies he had faced were stronger than him. Most of them were deity sea realm blood tribe cultivators. He had no idea how many times he had slashed out with his saber. The experiences he had gained from that life or death battle were not something his usual saber arts could compare to. It could be said that the benefits he had gained from such a battle far surpassed his usual secluded cultivation. What Lu Yi needed to do now was to imprint the various benefits he had gained from this battle into the depths of his soul. He needed to carefully reflect on the various insights he had gained from that life or death battle. The next time he encountered a similar situation, he needed to know what methods he could use to resolve it. Cultivators grew step by step like this. The more life or death situations they experienced, the more powerful their methods would become. Feng Wujiang explained, "Divine sense is the manifestation of spiritual energy. In truth, everyone has their own spiritual energy. It's just that the strength is different. Before reaching the deity sea realm, the spiritual energy you use is called mind energy. Junior brother should have experienced this before." Lu Yi nodded. When you activate your power and control the spiritual weapon, you not only consume your own spiritual power, but also the power of mind. Before the spirit sea realm, activating the power of mind for a long time is also a kind of tempering for the spiritual soul. Therefore, as a cultivator's cultivation increases, the power of mind will also grow and the spiritual soul will become stronger. However, you can't see or touch this kind of thing. Over time, when you reach the ninth order true lake realm, you will have a chance to trigger a qualitative change. That is, your mind energy will transform into divine sense. This will then lead to the birth of a deity sea and the birth of a soul body. Lu Yi was very enlightened. Although he had felt these things before, after all, no one had explained it to him in detail. Now that he heard his eldest senior brother's words, he couldn't help but feel enlightened. Rebirth, the great age of waves. Before reaching the deity sea realm, your mind energy is enough to control the power in your body, so you don't need something like divine sense. However, this is the limit when you reach the true lake realm. The next level of power is not something a mere mind energy can control. Therefore, at this stage, cultivators need to turn their mind energy into divine sense. Think of a way to transform the power of the mind into spiritual will. Only with spiritual will one be able to control a higher level of physical strength. At the end of the day, this is a cultivator's own desire. Lu Yi understood Feng Wujiang's meaning. The mind energy. Perhaps two cultivators had the same cultivation and strength, but life and death could be determined in a single exchange. This was because one of them had experienced more similar situations and knew how to effectively kill their opponent. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. Until one day when Lu Yi was in the middle of comprehending, he heard the sound of rushing air. He hurriedly released his divine sense to investigate and found that his eldest senior brother had returned. He had been busy outside and couldn't be seen. Lu Yi hurriedly got up and went to his eldest senior brother's bedchamber to explain his purpose. Feng Wujiang nodded lightly. Junior brother is now at the 9th Order True Lake realm. It is indeed time to break through to the Deity Sea realm. If junior brother has anything he doesn't understand, feel free to ask. Feng Wujiang was very happy to be able to teach Lu Yi cultivation. Lu Yi said, Senior brother, look, I am now at the 9th Order True Lake realm, but I have already formed my soul body and formed my divine sense. However, I feel that I am not a true Deity Sea realm cultivator. What kind of situation is this? Feng Wujiang said, I have never heard of this situation before, but junior brother, do you know why cultivators can only form their divine sense after reaching the 9th Order True Lake realm? Lu Yi naturally shook his head. In the beginning, when one's physical body was not strong enough, the cultivator's subconscious would seek a breakthrough and change. This was how the divine sense and Deity Sea realm were formed. Junior apprentice brother, the reason why you were able to develop your spiritual will at the True Lake stage is because your mental strength is too strong. Coupled with the stimulation of external factors, you were able to develop your spiritual will by chance. That is the protection of your own subconscious. However, you are not a true divine sea stage cultivator because your physical strength has yet to reach the standard. Just your spiritual will alone is not enough. Lu Ye's eyes lit up. So, what I need to do now is to accumulate the strength of my physical body. Feng Wujiang nodded. When your physical body strength reaches the standard, you will have the opportunity to break through to the Deity Sea realm. It was only an opportunity. Chapter 1044. In the 9 continents, there were many 9th Order True Lake realm cultivators. These people had been immersed in this realm for many years and had long raised their foundation to the extreme, which was the level of their physical body. However, it was still difficult for them to break through to the Divine Sea realm. Therefore, not everyone who had the opportunity to break through to the Divine Sea realm could achieve it. Only a small number of people could complete the transformation of their mental strength and nurture a soul body, turning it into divine sense. Lu Yi had taken this step a long time ago, but it was a coincidence. It was the protection of his subconscious mind under the stimulation of external forces. Because his physical strength was still at the True Lake realm, his divine sense was enough to control it. Therefore, his divine sense had not grown much. According to eldest senior brother, only when the foundation of his physical body was raised to the point where his divine sense could no longer control it, would his subconscious mind have the need to change. At that time, it would be the opportunity to break through to the Divine Sea realm. Therefore, what Lu Yi needed to do now was very simple. He still only needed to cultivate and constantly strengthen his physical body. Of course, while improving your physical strength, you also need to temper your mind. Only by progressing together can you achieve the best results. However, junior brother, your situation is special. Others have shackles when breaking through to the Divine Sea realm, but you should succeed naturally. After all, you have already nurtured a soul body, so there are no barriers. As long as you accumulate enough strength, you will naturally break through. How do I temper my mind? Lu Yi asked humbly. Feng Wujiang smiled slightly. For ordinary True Lake realm cultivators, the best way to temper their mind is through visualization. Visualization? Yes. When cultivating, visualize the structure of some objects in your mind and try to recreate them as completely as possible. At first, visualize some simple things, but after you become proficient, it will increase in difficulty. In this way, the visualization process will consume your mental strength. When your mind is tired, you will slowly recover. Repeat the process of consumption and recovery, and your mind will be tempered. Feng Wujiang looked at Lu Yi and continued, generally, cultivators from large sects would begin preparing for this when they reach the 7th Order True Lake realm, or even earlier, in order to lay down a good foundation. Every sect has its own visualization method, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. This is also a part of the heritage of each sect and cannot be lumped together. Junior brother, if you were in the 9 continents, the sect master would have taught you this. Lu Yi nodded. In this regard, his situation was a little difficult to predict. The main reason was that his cultivation speed was a little too fast. He had never heard of such a thing before. It was probably because the sect leader and second senior sister felt that his cultivation was too low and temporarily did not need to use it, so they did not tell him about it to avoid disturbing his state of mind. In the end, when he could use it, he was captured by that woman Yu Daiwei and then came to the blood-refining realm. If he hadn't heard eldest senior brother mention it today, Lu Yi really wouldn't have known about such a secret technique. De Shixiang's tone changed. Of course, that's for normal true lake-stage cultivators. Junior already has spiritual will, so it's much simpler. You just have to constantly expend your spiritual will and slowly recover it. Can I borrow some recovery items? Lu Yi asked. Like soul-cleansing water? If that was the case, then the effect of his spiritual force refinement would be countless times better than that of ordinary people. You'd better not. Feng Wujiang shook his head. This period of time is very crucial for you. Any impulsive actions are not encouraged. It's best to let nature take its course. There's still a year left, so I believe you can do it. A year? Lu Yi didn't understand. What will happen after a year? All right. Feng Wujiang smiled. Junior brother, you're not thinking of staying here forever, are you? After a year, the Qinji pillar will be activated. All right. Lu Ye's expression brightened. Senior brother, you mean? Feng Wujiang said, your situation is different from ours. We're all people who have reached the end of the road on the path of cultivation. Jiuzhou's Qinji sent us here for two reasons. On one hand, it wants us to think of a way to save the human race here and plan for the future of the human race. On the other hand, it's probably because it's afraid of us stirring up trouble in Jiuzhou. Over the years, those who were qualified to be sent to the blood-refining realm by Jiuzhou's Qinji were the top experts of each era. They've reached the end of the road on the path of cultivation and can't go any further. If such people continue to stay in Jiuzhou, they'll become restless factors. Therefore, Jiuzhou's Qinji sent them here to let them shine. Lu Yi was the first true lake-stage cultivator to be sent here, providing you with the latest chapter of Great God Momo's The Great Sage of Human Tao. Chapter 1044, Great Sage Beancurd Concubine, The Great Sage of Human Tao. Moreover, they were sent here as reinforcements. It was because of his arrival that the Blood Jade Sacred Land was able to resist the Blood Race Army's encirclement. I can't be sure, but I think Junior Brother has a high chance of returning to Jiuzhou. Senior Brother, you and those old seniors can't go back? Lu Yi asked. Feng Wujiang shook his head. I tried when the Qinji pillar was activated, but it didn't work. Lu Yi calmed himself down and said, I understand. He had to reach the Divine Sea within a year and return to Jiuzhou. This was what he had to do next. Lu Yi was very confident in this. Even though his path of cultivation had been filled with danger, at the very least, he hadn't encountered too many obstacles on his path of improvement, and he'd accumulated an indomitable mentality and imposing aura since a long time ago. He believed that this time would be no exception. After saying goodbye to Feng Wujiang, Lu Yi didn't rush to cultivate. Instead, he brought Dao 13 down the Holy Mountain and toured the Holy Island. A year was still a long time, so there was no need to rush. Moreover, he had just recovered from his injuries, so it wasn't good for him to immediately enter a state of cultivation. The entire Holy Island was a massive gathering place for the human race. Regardless of whether they were mortal or cultivators and mortals lived together in harmony. Perhaps it was because they had just repelled the Blood Tribe army, but the Holy Island was in a state of jubilation. The atmosphere was relaxed and there were lanterns and streamers everywhere. The streets were crowded with people and many shops stood on both sides of the street. It was a bustling scene. Lu Yi rarely saw such a scene. Perhaps some of the cities in Jiuzhou where mortals gathered were like this, but since he embarked on the path of cultivation, he rarely came into contact with a large number of mortals, so he couldn't help but feel a sense of novelty. As Lu Yi walked and looked, he came face to face with a Tonghulu seller. The seller opened his mouth and shouted. The straw target he was shooting at was filled with a bunch of crystal-clear Tonghulu. Lu Yi stopped the seller and asked for the price. Just as he was about to buy two to try, he suddenly remembered that he didn't have any currency here. He didn't have any spirit stones or spirit pills either. He had already used up all his cultivation resources when he broke through to the True Lake Realm 8th Order. Not far away, the tofu seller said, "Give him 2 Tonghulu sticks, I'll pay." Lu Yi turned his head and the corner of his eyes twitched. A moment later, Lu Yi and Dao 13 each held a Tonghulu stick and stood beside the tofu seller. Lu Yi still couldn't believe his eyes. "Senior, I almost didn't recognize you in your clothes." "Senior." Yuji raised her hand and knocked his head. "Speak properly." "Senior." Lu Yi also knew that he had misspoken, mainly because he didn't expect Yuji to be here and dressed like this. Previously, Yuji was always covered in a thin veil, and her graceful figure was faintly discernible, causing one's blood to boil. But now she was wearing coarse clothes with a square handkerchief on her head, and her sleeves reaching her elbows. She looked exactly like a peasant woman. "Senior, what are you doing?" Lu Yi was really puzzled. "Selling tofu." Yuji replied matter-of-factly, "I have to make a living." Lu Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The dignified 7th-generation sect leader of the 10,000 Dharma sect in Lei Province, Lai Feng, came to the blood-refining realm to sell tofu. If this was seen by the disciples of the 10,000 Dharma sect, how could they endure it? Moreover, why would a senior expert like Yuji need ordinary things to make a living? Lu Yi could see that she was playing life. He could only sigh that the actions of experts were always unpredictable. "I can't sell tofu?" Yuji glanced at him. You can sell it, you can sell it." How could Lu Yi dare to say no? "When I was young, I sold tofu to make a living. Later, I was chosen by a cultivator of the 10,000 Dharma sect and was accepted as a disciple. Now, I'm just resuming my old business. What's there to fuss about?" Yuji said and pointed across the street. "Look at that old man over there." Lu Yi looked in the direction she was pointing and saw an old man sunbathing at the entrance of a small shop. A few children gathered around him and poked his nose with green foxtails. He didn't look up and only occasionally waved them away, causing the children to snicker. There was a cloth banner beside the old man. On it, there was a large and eye-catching "Calculate" character. "He looks a little familiar," said Lu Yi. But then she thought about it. "Providing you with the great god Momos, the great sage of human Tao." Translator. Naoibo Studio Beancurd Girl? Underscore the fastest to update the latest chapter. Was he one of the 70 or so old seniors? Is he telling someone's fortune? Lu Yi was speechless. "It's just a hobby." Yuji smiled. "People like us can't die even if we die, and life is boring, so we can only find some entertainment for ourselves." "Senior, what are you saying?" Lu Yi did not know how to pick it up. But perhaps it was the truth. The old senior still had lifespan, but there was no road ahead. For any cultivator who pursued a higher realm all their life, this was a kind of torture. If there was really no road ahead, then it was fine. The key was that each of them could clearly feel that there was a road ahead, but they could not find it. So for Jiozhou's Tianji to send them to this blood-refining world, there was no complaint. They didn't have any complaints. At the very least, they had found what they wanted to do here. It wasn't like back in the 9 provinces, where they still had to put on airs as seniors and rely on their own identities. "Is it good?" Yuji suddenly asked. Lu Yi handed over the half-eaten candied haws. "Try it?" Yuji rolled her eyes. "Hurry up and eat. When you're done, help me shout." Lu Yi almost choked to death and swallowed the candied haws with great difficulty. "Senior, you're a bit too much. 2 skewers of candied haws are only worth a little. I'll pay you back later." "Cut the crap." A moment later, a crisp shout sounded from the tofu stall, selling tofu, fresh and tender tofu. To see the latest update of the Great Sage of Human Tao, providing you with the Great God Momos, the Great Sage of Human Tao. Chapter 1044, The Great Sage of Human Tao Beancurd Girl. Under Chapter 1045. After helping the tofu concubine sell tofu for 2 days, Lu Yi returned to the holy mountain. He opened the door to his room, which was filled with blood crystals of different sizes. Obviously, senior brother had ordered someone to deliver them. Blood crystals came from the blood race. During this battle, the human race had not collected many blood crystals. This was because most of the invading blood race cultivators had been killed outside the defensive line, and their corpses had fallen into the Divine Gate Ocean. How could they collect any blood crystals? These blood crystals were all collected from the previous battles, so there was a huge amount of them. Lu Yi smiled knowingly, walked into his room and sat down cross-legged. Activating the power of the talent tree, invisible roots spread out and pierced into the blood crystals nearby, swallowing them up and turning them into Baishen's foundation. 7. The cultivation of the true lake realm was the refinement of the cultivator's spirit energy. Every breakthrough in the realm was a transformation of one's spirit energy. The 9th order true lake realm was the 9th transformation of spirit energy. In theory, every small difference in the true lake realm would double the quality and quantity of one's spirit energy. Of course, in reality the difference was not that big. But it was undeniable that every breakthrough in the true lake realm would greatly increase a cultivator's strength. This was also the reason why the higher the cultivation of the earth cultivator, the harder it was to kill enemies of a higher realm. Those elite geniuses in the Spirit Stream realm and Cloud River realm might not be able to do so in the True Lake realm. Lu Yi was an exception. Yang Kai had developed his divine sense when he was just a first-order True Lake realm cultivator, and with his divine sense he could often kill enemies several minor realms above him. When he was just a third-order True Lake realm cultivator, he had jumped several minor realms to kill Ben Shu in Dark Moon Forest. Because of this, Li Tai Bai's name spread throughout the Dark Moon Forest overnight. He was even recognized by Lin Yu as a person who could compete with Lu Yi of the Blue Blood sect. Unfortunately, the heavens were jealous of talents. The rising star quickly met with misfortune, leaving Lin Mu helpless. Of course, even without his divine sense, Lu Yi could kill enemies of a higher realm. The main reason was that his spirit energy was too pure. Since the beginning of his cultivation he had the heavenly stone tree with him. It could be said that his spirit energy did not have the slightest impurity. This was something that no other cultivator could compare to. Cultivators couldn't avoid taking medicinal pills during their cultivation. Even if earth cultivation had a unique method to neutralize medicinal pills, the effect couldn't compare to the merciless burning of the talent tree. His foundation in the purity of his spiritual power was not as good as Lu Ye's. After the first transformation, second transformation, second transformation, second transformation, until the 9th transformation the gap slowly widened. At the same cultivation level, Lu Yi would always be able to bring out a higher level of strength. Now that he was a true Lake 9th order cultivator, there was no way for him to improve the purity of his spirit energy. All he could do was increase his spirit energy reserves and strengthen his physique. According to eldest senior apprentice brother, it was to accumulate the strength of one's physical body to the point where it was difficult for one's mind to control it. Only then would one's subconscious have the desire to change, and that would be the opportunity to ascend to the divine sea. Cultivating with the help of the talent tree was not a big deal. All he had to do was to maintain it. Of course, this process would also consume his mental strength. This was a good thing for him because his eldest senior brother had said that he needed to temper his mind while improving his physical strength. Only by doing so would he be able to achieve the best results. Lu Yi did as told. Lu Yi diverted a bit of his attention to continue activating the power of the talent tree. Then he activated his divine sense to construct the soul manipulation divine rune. This was his advantage. Other cultivators at this stage needed to rely on various visualization methods to consume their mental strength. Not only was it troublesome but the efficiency was also not high. However, he did not need any visualization methods at all. He only needed to construct the divine rune to continuously consume his divine sense. Of course, this kind of construction was done out of thin air. There was no one to control, nor was there any hope of controlling it. But soon Lu Yi discovered a problem. If he did this, wouldn't his mental strength become stronger and stronger? The stronger his mental strength, the stronger his divine sense would be, and he would be able to control the strength of his physical body more easily. Even if he didn't, when would he reach the point where his physical body would reach a certain level and his subconscious would want to change? Lu Yi stopped what he was doing and pondered quietly. Although his physical body and divine sense were both growing, the growth of his physical body was definitely much faster than his divine sense. After all, from the first order True Lake realm until now, his divine pond had not changed much. The improvement of his divine sense was completely dependent on swallowing soul-cleansing water. It could be seen that increasing the strength of his divine sense was still very difficult. A few days ago his divine pond had expanded a little. It was probably the result of accumulation over a long period of time. Therefore this cultivation method was not a problem. As long as his physical body improved quickly enough, there would be an opportunity. It could even be said that because he already had his divine sense, he could accumulate a greater foundation in the True Lake realm. Other True Lake realm cultivators did not have such an advantage. If other True Lake realm cultivators had an opportunity to break through to the Divine Sea realm after accumulating a certain amount of foundation, then the foundation he needed to accumulate was several times or even 10 times that of an ordinary True Lake realm cultivator. Or even more. They were both building houses. Other Divine Sea realm cultivators only had a thin layer of foundation, but he had several layers. In this way, when he truly broke through to the Divine Sea realm, the strength he could display would naturally be stronger than an ordinary Divine Sea realm cultivator. Of course, Lu Yi could predict that because of his uniqueness, the difficulty of breaking through to the Divine Sea realm this time was not something an ordinary person could compare to. He had already mentally prepared himself. 1 year was enough. Probably, soul manipulation divine runes continued to be constructed. When he felt a little tired, Lu Yi stopped his breathing and sat quietly, allowing the strength of his divine sense to slowly recover. This process could be seen directly. The specific manifestation could be seen above the god's pool. The god's pool was not empty but filled with water. This water was the condensation of the divine sense. If the divine sense was used too much, the water in the god's pool would decrease. If the divine sense was full, the god's pool would also be full. The recovery of the divine sense was very troublesome. There were no miraculous pills to rely on, especially for someone like Lu Yi who did not have a strong divine sense. In the past, if he used too much of his divine sense, he would directly use the soul-cleansing water to recover it easily. But now it was not possible. De Shixiang said that at this critical juncture, any actions that spoil things through excessive enthusiasm were not advisable. Therefore, Lu Yi could only allow his divine sense to slowly recover. This cycle repeated. In the room, Lu Yi sat cross-legged. The power of his talent tree continued to be activated. Pieces of blood crystals turned into powder. When the god's pool was full, he would construct the soul manipulation divine runes. When the god's pool was dry, he would rest and wait. He was not always in closed-door cultivation, so he did not have the temperament to do so. After all, he was still young and full of energy. It was impossible for him to sit still like the old seniors who had cultivated for hundreds of years. Every once in a while he would go down the mountain for a walk. He would go to the tofu concubine's place to eat some tofu pudding, go to the fortune-telling old seniors to calculate his future, play a few rounds of chess with some old seniors, and even plant rice with Meng Jie in the fields. It was hard to imagine the Vitality sect's third-generation sect master wearing a straw hat with his trousers rolled up and busying himself in the fields. However, Lu Yi was slowly getting used to the temperament of these old seniors. Their cultivation bases had already reached perfection, and they did not need to cultivate at all. They just needed to find something to pass the time. It could not be said that they were playing in the mortal world. Being part of the mortal world was their favorite thing to do. Of course, not all of the old seniors were like that. Some of them maintained the style of an otherworldly expert and lived in remote and uninhabited places. He did not purposely look for these old seniors. The main reason was that there were dozens of them scattered around the Holy Island. He could always meet one or two of them when he was wandering around. He was the Divine Lord's junior brother, and he had made great contributions in the battle against the Blood Race army. Naturally, the old seniors saw him in a new light and were happy to interact with him. Nobody taught him anything about cultivation. With the old seniors' eyesight, how could they not see that he was now at the critical moment of breaking through to the Divine Sea realm? It was not good to teach him anything at this time because the more they taught, the more chaotic it would be. They knew that the Divine Lord must have given them instructions on this matter. The Divine Lord might not be as old as them, but cultivation did not depend on age. Since the Divine Lord had given them instructions, there was no need for them to overstep their boundaries. Lu Yi would not take the initiative to ask them for advice. He had his own goal now and he only needed to take one step at a time toward it. It was the most comforting to have no intersections of utilitarian interests. If it were in the 9 states, each of these old seniors would be famous in the 9 states. If they really showed up, they would be surrounded by a large group of disciples and grand disciples. They would not have such leisure time. Immortal Wood's miracle. For more than half a year, Lu Yi had interacted with almost all of the old seniors. He did not know which of these people were from the Haotian Alliance and which were from the Myriad Devil Ridge. He did not even know the names of many of them. He only knew the names of a limited number of people. In such an environment, it was meaningless to distinguish between the Haotian Alliance and the Myriad Devil Ridge. However, when they interacted with each other in private, the old seniors would still be attacked and exposed. Who knew what they were talking about? They were not good people. They told Lu Yi to be careful. They said that someone had a vicious heart and told Lu Yi to take a detour. It seemed to be their greatest pleasure to badmouth the people they looked down on in front of Lu Yi. They did not have this opportunity in the past, but now they did. Every time this happened, Lu Yi would nod his head in agreement. He looked like he was worth teaching. This made the old seniors feel that Lu Yi was a talent with great potential. But recently, Lu Yi discovered that the number of old seniors on the Holy Island had decreased for some reason. Many times he couldn't even find the old seniors in those fixed places. Even the old seniors had disappeared. Eldest senior brother was nowhere to be seen. Lu Yi and Dao Shisan were squatting beside Tofu Concubine's tofu stall. They were eating tofu pudding while Han Hu asked, "Senior, where did my eldest senior brother go?" Yu Ji greeted the customers while saying without turning her head, "He went to look for blood crystals for you." Huh. Lu Yi was stunned. The Sacred Lord said that your cultivation consumed a lot of blood crystals. The blood crystals stored might not be able to keep up with your consumption. Therefore he brought a group of people out to sea to search for blood crystals. She did not hide it, mainly because there was no need to. Chapter 1046. Lu Ye's heart warmed. Yuji was curious, how can you use blood crystals to cultivate? My innate talent? Let me see. Yuji's curiosity grew. Lu Yi took out a blood crystal and threw it into her mouth, crunching as she chewed. The blood crystal was dark red, and the tofu pudding was snow white. The strong visual contrast made even someone like Yuji couldn't help but look away, muttering, "Little monster." Of course, he didn't have the intention to investigate. Who didn't have their own secrets? It could be said that each of the seniors sent to Blood Refining World by Heaven G had their own secrets. Cultivation continued. The blood crystals in the room had been replenished many times, all sent by eldest senior brother himself. However, Lu Yi could perceive that the blood crystals sent by eldest senior brother were getting fewer and fewer each time. Even if the Holy Land had a blood crystal reserve, there was always a limit. The Holy Land had only been collecting blood crystals for a few decades. Lu Yi felt a little bloated. It wasn't a psychological bloat but a genuine bloat. There was no change in his figure, but the spiritual power in his body had accumulated over this period of cultivation, becoming more and more vigorous. Judging from the fluctuations of his spirit energy alone, at this moment, his spirit energy was no less than the spirit sea realm. But in fact, he hadn't broken through to the spirit sea realm because his divine sense was strong enough to control the power in his body. His subconscious hadn't reached the point where he wanted to change. The biggest obstacle to breaking through to the spirit sea realm had come, which Lu Yi had expected. A first-order true lake realm cultivator had developed a divine sense and since then enjoyed the benefits of the spirit sea realm, but there was no free lunch in this world. Logically speaking, it was impossible for a true lake realm cultivator to accumulate such a huge amount of spirit energy. To this extent, an ordinary true lake realm cultivator would either have an opportunity to break through to the spirit sea realm and was making a final effort to do so, or because their mental strength was insufficient, it was difficult for them to control the accumulated spirit energy in their body. But Lu Yi was an exception. He could continue to accumulate spirit energy like this, causing the foundation of his body to become stronger and stronger. After more than a month, the spirit energy accumulated in Lu Ye's body became denser and denser. His spirit acupoints were constantly agitated. This was the pressure brought about by the massive amount of spirit energy in his body. Faintly he felt like he had touched that opportunity. Lu Yi was overjoyed. At this critical juncture he didn't run around, but instead focused on cultivation. A few days later the room's restriction was suddenly triggered. Lu Yi raised his hand to open the restriction, and eldest senior brother entered. Looking at Lu Ye's condition, Feng Wujiang asked with concern, "How's your cultivation?" "It should be soon." Feng Wujiang nodded. He shook his bags of holding, causing blood crystals to appear on the ground, as well as some medicinal pills and spirit stones. "Then cultivate well. There's still time, so don't worry." He could also see what kind of difficulties Lu Yi was facing now, but there was nothing he could do to help. He could only let Lu Yi do whatever he wanted. "Eldest senior brother, there's no need to look for more blood crystals." During this period of time, eldest senior brother had been bringing back fewer and fewer blood crystals. This time he had even brought back some pills and spirit stones. From this, it could be seen that the Holy Land did not have many resources left. Furthermore, he felt uneasy that his eldest senior brother had to lead a group of old seniors to collect the blood crystals. Feng Wujiang looked at him in confusion. "Do you have enough resources?" Lu Yi shook his head. "I don't, but I have a good place to go." "Don't worry, senior brother." Feng Wujiang pondered for a moment, then nodded. "Then be careful. If you need anything you must tell me." "All right. Got it," Lu Yi replied. Eldest senior brother did not bring many resources this time. Lu Yi spent less than 10 days to devour all of them. There were no more cultivation resources available, but Lu Yi could vaguely grasp the opportunity to make a breakthrough. The main reason was that after such a long period of cultivation, the foundation of his physical body had accumulated to an extremely terrifying level. Even though he had already developed a divine sense, he still faintly felt that he could not control it. Just a little more. Providing you with the latest chapter of Great God Momo's The Great Sage of Human Tao. Translator, Transin Editor, Transin into the Blood Sea for free reading. the fastest to update the latest chapter. He stood up, pushed open the door and rushed out. Soon he arrived at the edge of the Holy Island. Looking at the blood sea in front of him, he did not hesitate and dove in. This was the good place he told his eldest senior brother to go. 4 other human cultivators. There were no other cultivation resources in the blood refining realm other than the heaven and earth spirit chi. But that was not the case for him. The blood rivers that could be seen everywhere were the largest cultivation resources. Of course, there was a price to pay for using the blood rivers to cultivate. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Lu Yi was unwilling to take this step. Because once he took this step, it meant that it was the final sprint. He had to reach the divine sea before the talent tree ran out of fuel. Otherwise, no one would be able to withstand the strangeness of the blood sea. The moment he disappeared, figures flew from all around the Holy Island. They were the old seniors. In the blink of an eye, dozens of people had gathered. To be able to gather so quickly, they were obviously paying attention to his movements. Holy Lord, what is this junior brother of yours doing? He dares to enter the blood sea. An old man with white hair and a youthful face asked. The others also looked curious. Of course, they didn't think that Lu Yi would take things too hard. Since Lu Yi dared to take the initiative to enter the blood sea, it meant that he had the ability to resist the erosion of the blood sea. Although they also had the same ability, each of their cultivations had reached a high level. How could Lu Yi compare? Moreover, even they did not want to stay in the blood sea for too long. It consumed too much spirit chi. Feng Wujiang shook his head and did not say anything. He looked faintly worried. Holy Lord, don't panic. Yu Ji said, since he can use the blood crystals to cultivate, the blood sea probably can't do anything to him. Holy Lord, you might not know, but he eats the blood crystals. The old seniors' eyes twitched. This was the first time they had heard of this. The old seniors were gathered here, but they couldn't sense what was going on below the blood sea. The blood sea's suppression of spiritual sense was too strong. Even people like them couldn't probe too deep. In the depths of the blood sea, Lu Yi relaxed his body and sank all the way until he reached the bottom of the sea. There was an indescribable pressure pressing down on him from all directions. It made him uncomfortable and increased the burden on his body. Lu Yi suddenly realized that this was a good place to break through to the divine sea. The pressure from the enormous spirit chi in his body and the pressure from the blood sea outside his body. Under these two conditions, the opportunity in the unseen world became much clearer. He immediately activated the talent tree's power and devoured the surging power in the blood sea around him. On the talent tree, large patches of gray mist burned and rose. It was much more active than devouring the blood crystals. He did not know if he could successfully break through to the divine sea this time. If not, he could only wait until he returned to the 9 states. Of course, the prerequisite was that he could return to the 9 states. Eldest senior brother's previous words were only inferences. There was no clear evidence that he could definitely use the Pillar of Heaven's secrets to teleport. Therefore, it was possible that he could not return. If that was the case, then there was nothing he could do. He could only say that Heaven's secrets was unreliable. However, based on his interactions with Heaven's secrets so far, Heaven's secrets would not abandon him after exiling him to the blood refinement realm. His situation was not the same as those old seniors. His body soon turned into a whirlpool. Seawater surged in from all directions. Time passed. The foundation of his body continued to strengthen. The feeling of his spirit sense being unable to control his body slowly became clearer. Lu Yi suddenly entered an extremely strange state. It was as if his mind was drifting away, silently watching his breakthrough as a bystander. This feeling was extremely strange. Lu Yi could not tell if it was good or bad. However, there was not much he could do now. Since he decided to break through to the divine sea, he was destined to walk down this path. There was no turning back. He would either be badly battered or succeed. Although his mind was drifting away, Lu Yi could still sense his body. He could clearly feel that his body was getting stronger and stronger. Providing you with the latest chapter of Great God Momo's Human Tao Great Sage, Chapter 1046, Divine Sea. Enter the Blood Sea for free reading. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. As his body expanded, his spirit energy fluctuations became extremely unstable. Sometimes it was as fierce as the tide, and sometimes it was as still as the sea. This was a clear sign that it was difficult to control his body's strength. The opportunity for a breakthrough was very clear. In his mind, the deity's lake seemed to have a life of its own, constantly expanding and contracting. However, he could not take that step. Lu Yi had expected that it would be very difficult for him to break through to the divine sea because he had already developed spirit sense. However, he did not expect it to be this difficult. Now he was facing a predicament, and that was whether or not he could grasp that trace of opportunity before his physical body couldn't endure it any longer. He felt that he was just a little bit off. However, in life this little bit of difference was often the difference between heaven and earth. He could only continuously devour the energy in the blood sea and push himself to his limit. Fortunately, his body was strong enough. If it was an ordinary weapon cultivator, the accumulated foundation in his body would have already caused his body to explode. Even so, tiny cracks had appeared on the surface of his skin. It was as if a mirror had been shattered, and blood was flowing out from those tiny cracks. As the opportunity for a breakthrough became clearer, the deity's lake expanded and contracted more frequently. At this point it was truly the final step. If he succeeded, everything would be fine. If he failed, everything would be over. However, Lu Ye's mood was unprecedentedly calm. He was not nervous at all. He was very clear that he had already done everything he could. Cultivation was nothing more than doing one's best and leaving the rest to fate. At this critical juncture, Lu Yi suddenly felt something strange. It was as if there was some light flashing in front of him. Even though his eyes were closed, he could still feel the obvious light. He slowly opened his eyes and immediately saw a strange scene. In the dark red blood water, a ball of golden light was spinning towards him. It was obviously attracted by the whirlpool beside him. To view the latest chapter of Human Tao Great Sage, please enter in your browser. Providing you with the latest chapter of Great God Momo's Human Tao Great Sage, Chapter 1046, Divine Sea. Enter the Blood Sea for free reading. Chapter 1047. The moment he saw the golden light, Lu Yi couldn't help but be stunned. He didn't expect there to be such an abnormal thing under the blood sea. However, he quickly realized what it was. This was obviously the source of the blood kindred's holy seed. Lan Qiue had told him before that the reason she became a holy seed was because she caught a ball of golden light under the blood pool. Then, due to fate, she turned from a human into a blood breed. She was even the holy seed of the blood breed. When Lan Qiue told him about this matter, Lu Yi already had some suspicions. Perhaps there were no blood kindred in this world? Was it the strangeness of the blood pool that caused the birth of the blood kindred's holy seed? Then the blood kindred was born. Just like on the Wushuang continent, there were no corpse kindred in the first place. All the corpse kindred were transformed by humans. However, this was only a suspicion. There was no concrete evidence. Lu Yi didn't want to investigate the cause of the blood kindred's birth. It had nothing to do with him. However, he never expected that he would encounter such a golden light in the blood sea. There was no way to find out where the golden light originally was. During this time, Lu Yi had been urging the power of the talent tree to devour everything. His body had turned into a vortex. The golden light was obviously attracted by the flow of blood around him. From the golden light, Lu Yi could feel an extremely rich and surging power, something that the surrounding blood water simply could not compare to. It was like a bright moon suddenly blooming in a swarm of fireflies. And this was exactly what Lu Yi needed now. Without hesitation, Lu Yi reached out to grab the golden light and held it in his palm. Lu Yi felt like he had grabbed a soldering iron. He felt a sharp pain in his palm, but he didn't let go. The golden light seemed to have a mind of its own. It directly drilled into Lu Ye's palm and disappeared. Lu Ye's body shook. He hurriedly activated his divine sense to check his body. His entire body suddenly emitted a bright light. The golden light enveloped him and the veins on his skin bulged. Clearly there was a golden light flowing through them. With this golden light, Lan Qiue turned from a human into a blood kindred's holy seed. Lu Yi wasn't worried about such a change because he had the talent tree. It could burn all external energy that was harmful to him and leave behind energy that was useful to him. As expected, the moment the golden light entered his body, his tree began to sway. This was something that had never happened before. What made Lu Yi even more surprised was that the talent tree was emitting smoke. It was really smoking. In the past, no matter what he refined, even if it was something poisonous, the talent tree would only emit a gray mist at most. But this time the talent tree was smoking, and even the burning leaves on the talent tree were flickering. Lu Yi came to a realization. Although this ball of golden light contained an extremely vast amount of power, it also contained many impurities, or rather, many things that were harmful to him. As the talent tree emitted smoke, Lu Yi could clearly sense that the fuel stored in the talent tree was decreasing rapidly. Since the talent tree completed its transformation, Lu Yi could roughly sense the situation of the fuel storage. Now, the fuel in the talent tree basically came from the Sword Instrument sect's secret realm. There, Lu Yi had urged the talent tree to devour the fire of the earth lung for 2 months, which directly caused the Sword Instrument sect's secret realm to collapse. The harvest was so huge that it was difficult to estimate. After such a long time, even if he had stayed in the Blood Sea all this time, the talent tree still had about half of its fuel left. But now the fuel consumption had suddenly increased. At this rate, the fuel would be completely consumed in less than 5 days. By then, the talent tree would no longer have the ability to burn impurities. Lu Yi wouldn't be able to stay in the Blood Sea safely, and it would even affect his future cultivation. However, Lu Yi didn't have the time to pay attention to the talent tree. As the golden light ball entered his body, all kinds of mysteries suddenly exploded in his mind. Lu Yi didn't even know where these mysteries came from. They seemed to have appeared out of thin air. He quickly understood that these mysteries came from the golden light ball. It wasn't just a ball of surging energy, but also a unique inheritance. An inheritance that belonged to the blood kindred. The blood kindred's blood fetus was born from the blood river. They didn't have parents to take care of them, nor did they have elders to teach them. However, they were born knowing how to cultivate and how to perform all kinds of blood Dao secret techniques. This bloodline inheritance was engraved in their bones. The blood flowing in the blood river was the blood kindred's good teacher. The essence of the golden light ball was also a drop of blood. It contained many exquisite inheritances that were far from being comparable to the ordinary blood in the blood river. The enormous amount of information seemed to make his mind explode. The rich and surging energy flowed through his body, increasing the burden on his physical body. Lu Yi felt like he was going to die. He wished he could faint immediately. He couldn't understand how Lan Qiyu had persevered. However, he didn't know that when Lan Qiyu devoured the golden light ball, her entire body was rapidly transforming in the direction of the blood kindred's holy seed. For the blood kindred, this bloodline inheritance was branded in the depths of her blood. As her cultivation increased, it would awaken little by little. Therefore, although Lan Qiyue's situation was critical at that time, as long as she could survive the initial stage, she would be fine. He was different. With the talent tree burning all the impurities and things that were harmful to him, the golden light ball couldn't transform him into the blood kindred's holy seed. He still maintained the foundation of a human. However, the burning of the talent tree still preserved things that were useful to him, such as the bloodline inheritance hidden in the golden light ball. The things that Lan Qiyu needed to spend a lifetime to slowly awaken all exploded when it came to him. This kind of mental impact wasn't something an ordinary person could endure. Even a divine sea realm cultivator would have their divine sense destroyed and their spirit sea shattered in an instant. The feedback to Lu Ye's situation was even more intuitive. The illusory images of the gold and silver flood dragons drifting around the divine pool turned into specks of light and disappeared. The double dragon sea protection was a method that the gold and silver flood dragons of the War Merit Pavilion bestowed upon Lu Yi to protect his divine soul. It had been used repeatedly against divine sea realm cultivators. Today it was completely broken and there was no possibility of recovery. The impact that was hard to see with the naked eye crashed into Lu Ye's divine pool. Cracks appeared on the divine pool's barrier. In the past, even if it was attacked by a divine sea realm cultivator's divine sense, the water in the divine pool would remain calm because of the soul pagoda's suppression. But this time, even with the soul pagoda, the water in the divine pool was still undulating. Lu Yi had a splitting headache. The huge influx of information allowed him to constantly gain insights. However, whether it was his body or his divine soul, they were all suffering. It was extremely painful. Time seemed to pass extremely slowly. Lu Yi didn't know how much time had passed. He didn't even know if he was alive or dead. Until a certain moment, all the suffering suddenly disappeared. It was as if everything he had just experienced was just an illusion. Lu Yi couldn't help but shake his head. He felt as if his entire brain was shaking. He was still alive. This was a good thing. He hurriedly checked his body. An even greater surprise was imprinted in his heart. Unknowingly, he had successfully reached the divine sea realm. The originally small divine pool had obviously expanded a lot. It could already be called a divine sea. However, because he had used up too much of his divine sense, the seawater was as thin as mist. This caused his energy to be somewhat lacking. However, his body's vitality was limitless. Because his physical strength had been accumulating for more than half a year. The most intuitive manifestation was that the surging spirit qi in his body had become as thick as a paste. In fact, after his 9th revolution spirit qi and his breakthrough to the 9th order true lake realm, the spirit qi in his body had already shown signs of transforming in this direction. But it was just a trend. During this time, no matter how much Lu Yi accumulated his spirit qi, it only increased in quantity, not in quality. The breakthrough to the divine sea realm had undoubtedly caused his spirit qi to break through to a new height. His divine sense was weak, but his physical body was strong. This caused Lu Yi to feel as if he couldn't control himself. It was like a 3-year-old child wanting to lift a big hammer. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't lift it. The recovery speed of his spiritual energy suddenly accelerated. Another hour passed and Lu Yi rose to his feet. Channeling his spiritual energy, he leaped into the air and flew up. The fuel for his talent tree was too great. Lu Yi naturally didn't want to stay in the blood sea for long. He had no choice but to lack cultivation resources before, but now that he had reached the divine sea realm, he naturally wanted to leave as soon as possible. Several thousand meters up, he left the blood sea realm in a moment. Rushing out of the blood sea and standing in mid-air, bathed in the sunlight, Lu Yi couldn't help but have the illusion that he had been reborn. From now on he was a member of the divine sea realm. Congratulations, junior brother, for reaching the divine sea realm. Suddenly a voice called out from the side. He wanted to raise his hand, but his arm felt as heavy as a mountain. He wanted to get up, but there seemed to be a star pressing down on his back. Lu Yi was helpless. He could only continue to sit cross-legged at the bottom of the sea, silently cultivate, and wait for his divine sense to slowly recover. He didn't need to fully recover, but at the very least he wanted to be able to control his body. It had to be said that after reaching the divine sea realm, the recovery speed of his divine sense had become much faster. The thin sea of fog became denser and then began to condense into a liquid form. An hour later Lu Yi could move his arm. Awkwardly, he took out a drop of soul-cleansing water from his storage space and swallowed it. Lu Yi turned his head and saw Feng Wujiang standing on the edge of the blood sea, smiling at him. He had been waiting here. For others, even if they failed to reach the divine sea realm, it was nothing more than cutting off their future. If they were lucky enough, they could make a comeback in the future. However, Lu Yi had broken through under the blood sea, which was extremely dangerous. Feng Wujiang couldn't help but worry about him. He had waited here for many days. Now that he finally saw Lu Yi return safely and successfully breaking through, he was naturally happy. He loved reading books. Feeling the care and concern of his eldest senior brother, Lu Yi turned around and bowed solemnly. "I've made senior brother worry." Feng Wujiang smiled slightly. "Are you ready?" "What?" Lu Yi was puzzled. "Then I'm coming." Feng Wujiang suddenly clenched a fist. As his 5 fingers closed, the void around him was faintly distorted. The next moment he turned into a rainbow and pounced at Lu Yi. Lu Yi was shocked. "Senior brother, calm down." Chapter 1048. A moment later, the bruised and battered Lu Yi returned to his residence and sat down silently under the slightly surprised gaze of Dao 13, who was guarding the door. Eldest senior brother is being unreasonable. He had just broken through to the divine sea realm and hadn't had time to consolidate his cultivation or familiarize himself with his new strength before he was beaten up by his eldest senior brother. Although his eldest senior brother was only using the strength of a first-order divine sea realm cultivator, how could he be his opponent? Of course, Lu Yi didn't have any complaints about this. He knew that his eldest senior brother was doing this for his own good. Although this kind of tempering was a bit embarrassing, it would allow him to master his own strength faster, far better than cultivating behind closed doors. He had a hunch that his eldest senior brother's tempering was just the beginning. If he didn't want to be embarrassed, he had to familiarize himself with his new strength as soon as possible. Sure enough, the next day, just as Lu Yi was sitting cross-legged to adjust his breathing, 2 bangs came from outside the door, followed by Dao 13's roar that quickly faded away. Lu Yi's ears twitched. Although he didn't see it with his own eyes, he could imagine the scene outside the door. Someone must have wanted to break in, but Dao 13 had tried to stop them and ended up being thrown away. And someone who could so easily throw away a 5th-order divine sea realm cultivator like Dao 13? There were at least a dozen such people on the Saints' Island. The door was violently pushed open and Meng Jie, wearing a straw hat, rushed in like a bandit. From his appearance, it was obvious he had just been planting seedlings in the spirit field. Because his trousers had not been pulled down, his calves were covered in a mixture of mud and mud. "Senior Yu," Meng Jie looked at him calmly, "the Holy Master sent me here to temper you." Saying so, he reached out his big hand to grab Lu Yi. Lu Yi was completely helpless and was picked up like a chicken before being tossed aside. Meng Jie crossed his arms and stood up. "I'll only retain the strength of a first-order Divine Sea Realm cultivator. Go all out, there's no need to hold back. Within 1 hour, if I take a single step forward, you pass the test. Fine, follow me to work." "That's what you said." Lu Yi raised his hand and pulled out his Panshan saber. His spiritual energy surged as he charged at Meng Jie without holding back. Lu Yi knew that he was no match for a senior like Meng Jie. However, if he could force Meng Jie to move a single step within 2 hours at the same cultivation level, he might still stand a chance. In a split second, spiritual energy surged and blade light surged. 2 hours later, Meng Jie grabbed Lu Yi, whose face was increasingly bruised and swollen, and dragged him into a spiritual field like a dead fish. He planted seedlings for the entire afternoon. The next day, the door was suddenly pushed open, and a wisp of fragrance instantly filled the room. Lu Yi looked up and saw Tofu Ji looking at him with a smile. Dao 13 didn't even give a warning. "Let's go?" Yu Ji smiled happily. "Let's go." Lu Yi stood up. This afternoon, Lu Yi didn't help her sell tofu because it was already sold out. Instead, Lu Yi helped her grind soybeans. Days passed. Every day, a warm-hearted senior would come to find Lu Yi and use different methods to train his body and mind. Lu Yi was suffering and enjoying it. This was because he knew that such an opportunity was too rare. Which of those seniors wasn't the strongest in this world? If it weren't for the great opportunity of the 9 provinces, which brought them together, ordinary people wouldn't have the opportunity to let them train themselves. It was a complete waste of talent. However, in this blood-refining realm, under the request and guidance of eldest senior brother, such an opportunity presented itself to Lu Yi. How could he not seize it? Although he was tortured to death by different seniors every day, Lu Yi's progress was obvious. His Divine Sea realm was quickly consolidated, and he was constantly familiarizing himself with his current strength while being beaten again and again. This was mainly because even without these seniors, Lu Yi could do it himself if he spent some time. He could do these things. More importantly, the factions of the seniors were different, and their methods were different. Lu Yi's horizons were broadened, and he was able to see the exquisite methods of the top experts of the 9 regions. Moreover, he also learned how to use his own strength more effectively through the repeated confrontations. No one deliberately taught him anything. Everything depended on his own understanding, using his own pain and his own body to feel it. What could be taught was, after all, other people's things. What he comprehended was his own. If he really had to describe it, Lu Yi was like a piece of stubborn iron. The seniors hammered and hammered, making this stubborn iron become tempered thousands of times. Every day the time spent fighting with these seniors was extremely short. Meng Jie's 2 hours was the longest, and most of them were only half an hour. For the rest of the time, Lu Yi would sometimes comply with their requests and help them with some chores, but most of the time he was still comprehending his own body. After being beaten, there was always a value in being beaten. The temporary pain on the body turned into experience against the enemy. It was a good thing that ordinary people couldn't even ask for. Lu Yi gladly endured it. In addition, he had one more ability. Blood arts. When breaking through to the Divine Sea realm under the Blood Sea, he swallowed a golden ball of light, which could turn a vampire into a holy seed. It was called the Holy Blood for the time being. The mysterious power of the holy blood that could turn a creature into a holy seed was burned clean by the talent tree, but the bloodline inheritance of the vampires was preserved. This was the huge amount of information that exploded in Lu Yi's mind at that time. In other words, Lu Yi, as a human, received the bloodline inheritance of the vampires. This was very bizarre. Blood arts were mysterious and had a strong corrosive effect on things with spirituality. This was something that had been proven in the many battles with the vampires. If a spell cultivator received such benefits, they would definitely be overjoyed because no matter how the blood arts changed, they would transform. At the end of the day, it was still a kind of spell. However, Lu Yi was a weapon cultivator after all. He couldn't give up his current saber cultivation and switch to blood arts. Fortunately, he didn't need to give up on saber arts because the bloodline inheritance was branded in the depths of the bloodline. As long as he was strong enough, he could easily use it. Although the inheritance that Lu Yi received was not complete after being burned by the talent tree, it was still an intangible wealth. Moreover, Lu Yi was also proficient in spells. The imprint of the Soaring Dragon Realm's origin had made him have achievements in various factions. When he disguised himself as spell cultivator Niu Meng, even Lin Yu couldn't see through his disguise as sword cultivator Li Taibai. If he wanted to, he could even disguise himself as a ghost cultivator. Now that he received the inheritance of the vampire's blood arts, it would only enrich his means. Among the many blood arts, there were 3 that he valued the most. The first was the Blood River art. It was the kind of blood river that could only be used by vampires above the true lake stage. This kind of spell could create a convenient environment for oneself to use at any time. The environment, and on certain days, the reward for Muni's use of magic to avoid fatal injuries. This was a very practical spell. The second was the Blood Escape art. There were many different versions of the Blood Escape art in the 9 continents, but they were mostly the same. Back then Wuxia had used it before. It was a secret spell used to escape. However, once it was used, the user would enter a weakened state for a short period of time. Lu Yi had never cultivated the Blood Escape art before, so he didn't know what the Blood Escape art in the 9 continents were. However, it was undeniable that the vampires had their own uniqueness in this kind of spell. The Blood Escape art in the 9 continents couldn't be compared to the Blood Escape art of the vampires. If this spell was used well, it could be used to save one's life when facing an undefeatable opponent. The third was the Blood Refinement art. Through a secret spell, one could condense one's own blood and turn it into essence blood. Essence blood had endless uses. If it was infused into the blood river, it could strengthen the blood river. If it was used to activate the blood arts, it could greatly increase the power of the blood arts. Small book pavilion for Jianghu's wine arts. The effects of activating the Blood Escape art under normal conditions and activating the Blood Escape art with essence blood were completely different. The latter could allow one to run faster. Everyone was competing if Qingjia refined the deep stove and was reborn with a drop of blood. Lu Yi felt that this was a bit ridiculous. However, this was what was recorded in the blood race's bloodline inheritance, so there was no way to tell if it was true or false. He didn't need to spend any effort to cultivate 99% of the blood arts. Since he had obtained the inheritance of the blood race's bloodline, these spells were imprinted in his bones and could be used at will. Of course, due to the limitations of his cultivation and proficiency, the power of the spells would be different. However, the blood refinement art had to be actively used because it consumed one's own blood and energy to condense the essence blood. Lu Yi had been doing this for the past few days. He had already achieved results. A drop of essence blood was stored in his heart, and it contained an extremely powerful energy. Moreover, he found that the blood refinement art was extremely compatible with his body. Ordinary blood race members needed to constantly replenish themselves when using the blood refinement art because their own blood and energy were constantly being consumed. Although Lu Yi also needed it, his situation wasn't as serious as the blood races because his vitality was vigorous. The gift of the Soaring Dragon Realm's broken origin had created his terrifying vitality, and as time passed, it continued to transform his physical body. In terms of physique, he wasn't inferior to a body cultivator at the same level. This wasn't just because of the early refining of dragon scales. It was also because of the subtle transformation of the Soaring Dragon Realm's origin. Even if it was a broken origin, it was still the origin of a realm. When added to a person's body, the benefits could be imagined. With an endless stream of vitality, the blood and energy Lu Yi lost in the blood refinement art could be quickly replenished. As long as he restrained himself, the loss of the blood refinement art wouldn't affect him. However, Lu Yi could only refine 3 drops of essence blood in the end. It wasn't that he didn't want to refine more, but that he didn't have the strength to do so. The blood refinement art also had its limits. The higher one's cultivation, the more essence blood they could refine. He had just advanced to the Divine Sea realm, so 3 drops of essence blood was his limit. To him, these 3 drops of blood essence were 3 trump cards. By activating the blood essence, his explosive power would instantly increase tremendously. He even had a feeling that he could burn his blood essence to activate the bloodstained spiritual tattoos and even transform into a beast. If that was true, then it would be good news for him. The bloodstain and beast transformation were his trump cards, but these 2 methods had always had a drawback that was difficult to eliminate. They couldn't achieve an instantaneous eruption, and they needed to constantly store up power. Chapter 1049. If Lu Yi encountered an evenly matched opponent or an opponent stronger than him, he would still have time to store up his strength, But if he really encountered an opponent who could completely crush him, where would he find the time to store up his strength? Not to mention in many battles life and death could be decided in an instant, so even though he had these two trump cards, Lu Yi had rarely used them. If burning his blood essence could solve this problem, it would be good news for him. Lu Yi found an opportunity to test it out and found that his guess was correct. Burning his blood essence did allow him to instantly activate his blood-stained spirit tattoo. However, with the improvement of his cultivation, the increase brought by his blood-stained spirit tattoo was no longer as great as before. Lu Yi had activated his blood-stained spirit tattoo several times before and the increase in his strength had been considerable, but now that he had reached the Divine Sea Realm, the increase in his blood-stained spirit tattoo was limited. This trump card had become somewhat useless. Fortunately, Lu Yi had more than one card up his sleeve. He couldn't use his beast transformation because he needed to cooperate with Hu Bo. Time passed day by day, and under the tempering of a different senior every day, Lu Yi quickly grasped his own strength. In the beginning he was one-sidedly trampled by the steel suppression, but now he was gradually able to stand on equal footing with the seniors. This was growth and it was something that could be felt intuitively. Lu Yi didn't think about defeating them as that was simply unrealistic. Each of these seniors had profound cultivation, and even if they suppressed their strength and only displayed the strength of a first-order Divine Sea Realm cultivator, their many years of combat experience and vision were not something he could compare with. In their eyes, Lu Yi was just a child who was learning how to speak. Occasionally, when he had some free time, he would drink and chat with his eldest senior brother. Another day, Lu Yi pushed open the door and came out. At first glance, he couldn't help being stunned. Because outside the door, led by his eldest senior brother, were many seniors. When they saw him appear, some wore playful expressions, some smiled lightly and others remained calm. Lu Yi suddenly wore a bitter expression. "Eldest senior brother, we agreed to come one by one. In the past there was only one senior waiting outside the door for him, but today for some reason all of them had come. If all of them came at once, Lu Yi wouldn't have any room to fight and would just lie down and let them teach him a lesson." "Time's up," Feng Wujiang said. Lu Yi instantly reacted, "So fast." Calculating the time, it had been 3 or 4 months since he broke through to the Divine Sea Realm, but recently he had been immersed in a battle of wits with these seniors and had forgotten some things. "Junior brother, do you have anything to prepare?" asked Feng Wujiang. Lu Yi shook his head. There was nothing to prepare. When he came here he brought Dao 13 with him. Naturally, he didn't need to prepare too much when he left. The premise was that he could escape. "Let's go then," Feng Wujiang said. The group of people marched toward the Tianji Hall. A short while later, Lu Yi stood in front of the divination pillar in the divination hall. He turned around and respectfully bowed. "Many thanks to seniors for taking care of me during this period of time. This junior has benefited greatly and will not dare to forget." Tofu Ji pursed her lips and said with a laugh, "Normally I don't see you being so scholarly and reasonable, yet today you are putting on an act." As she said that, she took out a jade tablet and handed it to him. "Take this." What was this? Lu Yi did not understand and took it. "It's nothing. If anyone from the Thousand Law sect bullies you in the future, just take this out and show them." Lu Yi immediately understood that this thing was probably something similar to a token. A sword chime was heard and a small flying sword appeared in front of Lu Yi. Jianghu Hong's voice was heard. "If you need the help of Beishin Sword Sect, take this to Heavenly Mountain. It's another token." Lu Yi had just put it away when another jade tablet flew in front of him. Somewhere in the crowd an old man said, "This is my identity tablet. Although it has been many years, there should still be people from the Zhonglang sect who recognize it. Take it with you." One token after another appeared, each one representing a large sect. Lu Yi put them away one by one. Not every senior had a token. For a loner like Wu Chong, even if he gave Lu Yi a token, it would be useless. He did not have a sect in the land of the 9 states. However, people like that were in the minority. "Seniors, do you have any words for me?" Lu Yi asked. Yu Ji said, "To our sects we are already dead. If you bring some tokens back they might still be useful. But if you tell them that we are still alive, I'm afraid no one will believe you. You might even get into trouble. Just take care of yourself. Maybe I won't be able to go back." Lu Yi had just spoken when Yu Ji knocked him on the head. Lu Yi rubbed his head and stood obediently. He then looked at Feng Wujiang. "Does eldest senior brother have any instructions for me?" Recently he would drink and chat with eldest senior brother in his free time. Eldest senior brother learned about Feng Yuechan's situation from him, but Lu Yi did not know about Qiu Min's situation. He had never met this eldest senior brother's wife, so he naturally could not tell Feng Wujiang in detail. Feng Wujiang shook his head. Don't say anything when you go back. It will only add to your troubles. If there is a day when we meet again, we will. I know. Lu Yi nodded. Time passed. Everyone waited quietly. Until an hour later, the deathly still Tianji pillar suddenly fluctuated with a subtle energy fluctuation. Compared to the normal fluctuations of the Tianji pillar, this fluctuation was almost negligible. If Lu Ye's spirit sense had not become stronger, he would not have sensed it. Every few years, Tianji would send large amounts of resources here, including but not limited to spirit pills, spirit stones and spirit tools. After all, the environment of the blood refinement realm was not very friendly to human cultivators. Aside from the spirit energy of heaven and earth, there was no external power for humans to borrow. Aside from delivering resources, the Tianji pillar had always maintained its silent state. Now that the Tianji pillar was reacting, it was clear that Tianji was sending resources here again. The subtle energy ripples continued to fluctuate. After a long while, a large pile of storage bags appeared in front of the Pillar of Mysteries. Junior Marshal Brother, it's time to go. Feng Wujiang looked at Lu Yi. Lu Yi didn't hesitate and gave Dao 13 a look. The two of them stepped forward and placed their hands on the Tianji pillar. Whether they stayed or left depended on this. In the next instant, Lu Ye's body shook as he understood that he could leave. He turned to look at Feng Wujiang and said, Eldest senior brother, I will be back. As soon as he finished speaking, the originally subtle energy fluctuations suddenly became fierce and intense. The place where Lu Yi stood also became distorted, and the space around him rippled like water. As the ripples spread, Lu Ye's body quickly became like a lake, as if he was about to disappear from this world. Fu, on the other hand, Dao 13 didn't change at all. He simply placed his hand on the Tianji pillar and remained motionless. Rumble. Muffled thunder suddenly rolled across the sky and a great malice descended from the heavens. In the Tianji hall, many of the elders looked up. Even with the dome blocking them, their divine senses could still see through it and clearly see what was going on. They saw that in the sky, blood clouds had somehow gathered. Within those clouds, red lightning flashed. Small lightning bolts quickly gathered in the clouds and formed a thick lightning bolt in the blink of an eye. It was like a lightning dragon soaring through the sky. Almost as soon as this thick bolt of lightning was formed, it fell straight down like a blood dragon from the sky, heading straight for the Pillar of Heaven's secrets. Not good. Feng Wujiang shouted. He leaped up and passed through the dome of the Tianji hall to meet the lightning bolt head-on. Numerous silhouettes followed closely behind Feng Wujiang. There was also a portion of Dharma cultivators like Yu Ji who remained on the ground. Spiritual energy surged around their bodies as they unleashed exquisite Dharma techniques. Some attacked the blood dragon, while others unleashed defensive Dharma techniques to envelop the Tianji hall. Despite the sudden change, everyone cooperated seamlessly. The crackling sound was deafening. Even the top talents of the 9 states felt their eardrums hurt. This was the wrath of the heavens, the manifestation of the will of the blood refinement realm. In the past, the Tianji pillar remained silent all year round. Even when transporting resources, it was cautious. Therefore, although the blood refinement realm had its own will of the heavens, it had never been able to discover the heavens of the 9 states. But this time the situation was different. Lu Yi used the Tianji pillar to teleport, causing a huge commotion. The will of the blood refinement realm sensed this and immediately unleashed its thunderous fury. Feng Wujiang's body was like a sun, radiating dazzling light. He was the first to crash into the blood-colored lightning bolt. His body suddenly shook. Cracks appeared on the surface of his skin and blood spurted out. His body fell abruptly, but he didn't dodge. Figures followed closely behind, using various methods to bombard the blood-colored lightning bolt. This eruption wasn't the usual method used to train Lu Yi. Many senior experts didn't hold back at all. With such a combined force, no one in the world could withstand it. Even if it was a holy seed, it would be torn apart in an instant. But the wrath of the heavens was still the wrath of the heavens. Even if the will of the blood refinement realm wasn't as clear and strong as the heavens of the 9 states, this method still exceeded the limits of cultivators. With a loud rumble, the many figures that had rushed into the sky were like meteorites falling from the sky, scattering in all directions. But the blood-colored lightning bolt was obviously much smaller. The resistance of the strongest talents of the 9 states wasn't useless. The blood-colored lightning bolt landed in the Tianji hall in the blink of an eye. With Yu as the leader, the people who stayed here and activated their defensive methods all changed their expressions. Like a hot knife through butter, the layers of defenses were broken through. Yu and the others flew out in a sorry state. However, after the obstruction of the many defenses, the blood-colored lightning bolt shrank again. It was less than 20% of its original size. The change happened suddenly. From the moment Feng Wujiang rushed into the sky to the moment the blood-colored lightning bolt hit the Tianji pillar, only 2 breaths of time had passed. When Feng Wujiang and the others returned to the Tianji hall again, the place had returned to calm. Even the blood clouds that gathered in the sky had dissipated. Feng Wujiang stood in place, frowning. He was faintly uneasy. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.